Astonishing Legends Network.
Listen to the Astonishing Junk Drawer exclusively at patreon.com/astonishinglegends.
I don't think people are taking time off work to hit this.
You sent me some video of you dancing around the kitchen. It was amazing.
Music any white drunk college kid can dance to.
I'll just stick with the AI stuff.
That's Rowan said that, not me.
My math teacher, she doesn't explain it that well.
Well, that's the hallucination, right? That's like AI hallucination.
We have lives too.
Mother Shipton's Cave.
Rich Haddam is coming. Jim Harold is coming. I'm doing a lot of laughing. Is it?
Right.
Astonishing Legends would like to thank the Washington Post, Embark, Squarespace, Mint Mobile, our contributors at patreon.com, and you, our listeners, for making tonight's show possible.
7.5 years ago, we did a 3-part series on the most famous ghost ship in maritime history, the Mary Celeste. If you haven't heard it, now's a good time to go back and find those episodes. We've always been intrigued by ghost ships and other maritime disasters. After all, we allegedly know more about the surface of Mars and the Moon than we do the sea floor. But what of the lakes? We also covered the deepest lake on Earth some time ago as well, Lake Baikal in Siberia. No shortage of strange things going on there either. All fascinating bodies of water to be sure. But perhaps it's time we consider something a little closer to the Astonishing Legends home office. Continentally, anyway. The Great Lakes. The largest collection of freshwater lakes on the planet, holding more than 20% of all of the freshwater there is. Anyone who lives in North America knows that stories of the Great Lakes are steeped in history, folklore, and yes, astonishing legends. Tonight, we plan to take a look at one of those legends. The legend of the SS Kamloops and its most famous eternal passenger, Old Whitey. At the beginning of the 20th century, Canada was still sorting out ways to get goods deep into the country, which at the time was still part of the British Empire. It was important to get food and other goods from the east coast of North America into the interior of Canada, and the best way to do that was via the St. Lawrence River and then Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, Lake Huron, and Lake Superior in that order. Easier said than done, it required traversing numerous disparate canals and locks to pull off. Special ships were built to accomplish this task, and one of them was the SS Kamloops. The Camloops and its crew worked hard for longer shipping seasons than most of the vessels on the Great Lakes, and in time, that relentless schedule would take its toll. The SS Kamloops and 22 people aboard vanished without a trace during a severe Lake Superior storm on a cold December night in 1927. A story like this might end there, but if it did, we probably wouldn't be talking about it. The fate of the Kamloops and all aboard, including at least one permanent resident, would take time to figure out.
Welcome back to Astonishing Legends. I'm Scott Philbrook, and this is Forrest Burgess.
The fad of last tripping claimed 4 victims this year, landmarks which will be pointed out in 1928 when the merciless wire ticks out again the order for that last cargo. Marquette Daily Mining Journal, December 24th, 1927.
Join us tonight for our episode on the SS Kamloops and Old Whitey.
And we're back.
That we are, folks. First things first, we have the first ever summer break coming for Astonishing Legends. First one we've ever taken in 10 years. That's why we're doing 2 shows in a row right now, because after that, we're taking a few weeks off.
It's not really a break, because we're going to be working like crazy during that time on something new that we've been trying to get out of the gate for a while. So remember, good things come to those who wait. And that's usually said by people causing the waiting. But we've still got tonight's show and a new one next week to keep you entertained.
Yes, and Monster Fest 2024, the second one ever, is June 28th and 29th in Canton, Ohio, in just a little over a month. And as we've already said, we're going to be there.
Yes, and we have some exciting news. It looks like the boys from the new Astonishing Legends Network show, Scared All the Time, are going to be crashing the gates, being obnoxious and sleeping on the floor in one of our hotel rooms. Not mine, right?
Well, I snore, so
Yeah, so do I. Well,
I don't think that.
either way, we're looking forward to Monster Fest 2024, and we can't wait to see everyone, and neither can Ed and Chris from Scared All the Time. Oh, by the way, they just launched Scared All the Time Premium, which gets you commercial-free episodes, exclusive merch, and more.
Yeah, they have a link on that, so just check it out. We are really looking forward to hanging out with them, and they're also going to join us for our live show as well. So be there for that. We may do an impromptu AMA or something like that.
Well, we're going to need a bleep machine, the 0K tone. Yeah.
Yeah, we definitely are. We'll do a Mr. Disclaimer. If you haven't gotten your tickets to Monster Fest 2024, just Google it and get them now, and we'll see you there. Last quick note, I just finished up a supporting part in a new podcast from Amy Poehler's production company, Paper Kite Productions.
What?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tiny part, but my wife, Emily Spivey, is one of the leads in it,
there you
along
go.
with Liz Kukowski, who's been on our show too. They co-wrote the movie Wine Country together, which Amy directed, and this new show is a parody true crime show, which they co-host.
Ooh, so you're kind of a Nepo baby, is that what you're saying?
Yes, I am, total. Nepo hubby.
And who
Nepo
are you?
hubby.
Who are you in this wonderful production?
I play the husband.
Of course. Isn't that what you played in Wine Country too?
Yeah, but I get way more time on the mic this time.
I see.
So, folks, look for Women Talking About Murder on Odyssey or wherever you get your podcasts. It just dropped a few days ago on May 9th, 2024. And if you listen closely, you might even hear me in the background spouting off about Bigfoot. And listen for a promo for it in tonight's episode.
Okay, Mr. Big Time, let's get down to business. So where do we start?
You know, I had to talk to Tess to find out why this thing was even in my mind, this story. But I couldn't remember where it came from.
Well, of course, Tess had written a blog post about it, as she has with every topic of interest under the sun. She is that prolific and dialed in. But in her notes here in the blog post, she said it was suggested to her by listener Marco A. And then, of course, she took that suggestion, ran with it, and turned it into a blog entry. And there was one comment on it from a year ago. And we'll get to that. But this is a topic that has been suggested by a lot of listeners, hasn't it?
Yeah, a lot of people have wanted to hear about Old Whitey and the Kamloops. Old Whitey, people, wait a minute, what is it? Is this going to get racist? It's not. You'll find out why he's called Old Whitey. It is a ghost story of sorts, but different in other ways. And this is a treacherous way to make a living, is taking anything across these lakes. It's not like when you go down to the pond and rent your paddle boat. This is like, this is the real deal. Well, tonight's story is about a specific ship. What we want to do is we want to set the stage so that you can understand what life was like for these folks that were aboard this vessel, what the vessel did, and what the scenario was, why it was up there, and what led to its tragic end. And it was a very tragic end. And we feel like that when you get all this background together, you can put yourself there, which is one of the coolest things about getting into an old legend like this or folklore, is like, what would this have been like had I been there? Or, if this was a movie and I wanted to see it in my mind's eye. So we're going to back it up here and start with the actual ship, the SS Kamloops. The SS Kamloops was originally commissioned by a company called Steamships Limited, based in Montreal, Quebec. And Steamships Limited was a subsidiary of Canada Steamship Lines, or CSL, if you hear us saying CSL later in the episode. It's not abundantly clear that it's a subsidiary. There's a little more, there may be some funny business going on there. We'll explain some of that later on. But for right now, that's the first thing to know. Now, the Canada Steamship Line, CSL, that's still an active business.
Yeah.
It was founded in 1845, which makes it 179 years old. Pretty wild. Whenever a company's that long. I always think about companies, there's that list. I think Wikipedia has a list of the oldest companies in the world. And one of them is the symbol. There are two of them are symbol companies. One of them is like Zildjian, which I don't even know if I'm saying that right. Such a nerd.
Right.
And they go back so long ago. And then you can get in a rabbit hole with this, where you start looking at continuously operating hotels or places where people can stay, like in Japan, that are like 1,000 years you've been able to go and get a bed. It's so cool to me, though, when stuff's that old.
No, we just recently talked about something that still had its original business license. Oh, you know what? Weirdly enough, I remember, I think it was Wells Cargo during the Truman Bethurham UFO series, and that company is had the first license, I believe, in Nevada. So they had business license number 1. And general rule of thumb is that most historied and respectable companies don't last much longer than 100 years at most. So that's kind of a general rule of
Oh,
thumb. But
okay.
they do break the rules here, as this company has.
So we got 90 to go.
Oh, us? Yeah. Well, yeah. 90 months, 90 minutes, who knows? That's the idea, though, is that it's like there's a lot of storied companies. The Hudson Bay Company figures into this as well, and how they got goods and services around, of course, then. But as a relatively newish company, this is some very old history for this part of the Terra. So things have been figured out. But what we're seeing here is around the turn of the century, as these communities developed in the Canadian provinces, is that goods and services need to be shipped for expansion. You want, if you live in the country, you're the administration, you're the government, you're going concerns here, you want expansion. You want people to move in, you want developed. And so to facilitate that, a lot of goods and services had to be traded, and water's an easy way to move that. But as we'll see, it comes with a big price sometimes, and it can be very treacherous. You do have a means of shipping, but it's not always smooth sailing, shall we say. But they pushed it to the limit, and lots of goods and services. The fur trade was huge during this time, and so a lot of commerce is happening, and people can tend to take risks and cut corners.
So if you're familiar with Northeast North America,
Mhm.
then you're already going to know this. And I know what it looks
Right.
like on the map. And when you look at New England and you see the shape of North America and how that matches up to
Mhm.
Canada, if you're from Canada or New England, you're going to know all this. But if you're not, the river that connects the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean,
Mhm.
it runs 1,900 miles from Lake Ontario northeast through Montreal, Quebec City, and into the Atlantic just north of Nova Scotia. That is the St. Lawrence River.
Right.
And that's how vessels can get from the Atlantic Ocean into the interior of the Great Lakes and way into Canada as
Yeah.
well, and also Michigan and the Upper Peninsula and that part of North America. What's fascinating about the St. Lawrence River and that whole area is that it's what's left of a prehistoric sea,
Mhm.
referred to in modern times as the Champlain Sea, which is why you may have heard up that way as well, Lake Champlain.
Right,
And
right.
Champ.
Oh,
Champ, who's
their
like
own
our
sea
North
monster.
American
Well,
Nessie.
their own
Yeah.
water monster, let's say.
Yeah, and if the Champlain Sea was still around today, Ottawa, Montreal, and Quebec would all be submerged in it. So
Yeah.
that's what's interesting. But now it's just the St. Lawrence River, which is still a huge river.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So let's circle back around to the folks that commissioned the construction of the SS Kamloops. That was Canada Steamship Lines.
Mm-hmm.
That is Canada Steamship Lines, or CSL.
Well, CSL started out as smaller companies, as a lot of them do, and then, like the aforementioned Steamships Limited, and then that merged and grew into a giant corporation, which used the St. Lawrence River to flourish. And then it expanded to ship steel produced in Ontario and coal from Pennsylvania to power plants. Well, you lived in Pennsylvania. Remember, you had those little tiny canals out back of people's property that you would
That's right.
have the little
That's right.
canal boats. That's how you get stuff to, without having to carry it across in by wagon train or various other methods or rail. Water's already there, easy to float on, easy to transport heavy items. So that's what they're doing here. Well, CSL, they were commissioning and then acquiring vessels regularly as they expanded. So you always wonder who are some of the richest people in the world are. Well, they're in shipping and transport because
That's right.
it's a lot of goods. It's a lot of money, a lot of commerce riding on it. In this case, a company that large and running for so long over such a large area, well, you're going to have brushes with disaster because you're tempting fate. It's, like all the shipping, especially the sailing ships. Why there's so many sunken treasures is that, it's an easy way to get stuff. Well, you have to across oceans, and you're going to hit some storms, and you're going to incur losses and loss of life. Well, this disaster, though, at this particular time, it's kind of beyond the astonishing legends that we're sharing tonight, in that, all right, I'm just going to bring out the term, the perfect storm, sort of. That's why it's interesting to note all the things that went wrong on that fateful evening. Well, case in point, though, here with CSL, they'd also entered the passenger vessel business around the turn of the century, the early 1900s, and using 350-foot ships. So not real long, but these ships could carry 500 to 600 passengers on overnight trips to the various outlying communities and provinces and whatnot. Again, shipping people and goods in a massive westward expansion, so to speak. And then 22 years after we have the tragic loss of the Kamloops, which we'll discuss tonight, disaster struck again in 1949 when another ship, a 362-foot SS Campblair, caught fire in Toronto Harbor. And we talked about this before. As we go along, Scott, keep in mind, natives will say Toronto.
Yes.
You don't say. I think Woody Harrelson was filming a movie there and got in trouble for saying Toronto. So you gotta mash it together. Toronto.
That's also a valuable lesson that Rich imparts in
That's
his
right.
latest episode of Richard Haddam's
That's
Paranormal
right.
Bookshelf, which I don't think you've heard the latest one yet, but you
Not yet.
got to hear it. There's a lot of reference to you in that one.
Ah, very nice. Can't wait for that. Yeah, and no, I just he's never got over it. When I was I purposely tried to stick in his craw the last name of the author, Chaucer.
Oh,
Yeah,
Chelsea.
that just rubbed him the wrong way, and mission accomplished on my part. Well, now with that unpleasantness out of the way, in this particular case, it had been on a 7-day cruise of Lake Ontario. We're talking about the SS Neurotic now, that had departed from both Detroit and then Cleveland, and the fire burned exceptionally fast because, get this, the wooden hallways on it were oiled with lemon oil. And that just went up. So this meant the fire burned very quickly and hot. The fire extinguishers apparently were useless. And then you have a poorly trained and panic-prone crew, of which only 15 were on board when it started. So it took about 8 minutes to burn half of the ship very quickly.
Yeah.
Just imagine I can waste 8 minutes in the blink of an eye. So this fire was so intense, the glass windows melted. And sadly, many of the passengers' charred remains were found in the hallways trying to escape. Some victims were so badly incinerated that they had to be identified only by dental records. And an accurate count of how many people passed away has never really been determined, but it's thought to have been between 118 to 139 souls. So quite a tragic high number.
Yeah, and they never figured out exactly what started it. They think it might have been a discarded cigarette, but
Yeah.
they're not really sure. I mean,
Yeah.
if they had that investigation now, they probably could track it down.
Well, watch out for that
Yeah.
lemon pledge.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
weird though how certain small facts, like I said, out on the open sea, can have a disastrous effect. We certainly saw that with the Mary Celeste and some of those theories of maybe hauling denatured alcohol and the way you carry that. I saw this one really well investigated mystery of how a ship went down. They think that a door during a storm had been left open and it took on so much water it started to unbalance the ship, and that caused it to capsize. So
Oh, yeah.
again,
Yeah.
I always think of nature and extreme physics, as I call it, as an equation. And when you ramp up one side of the equation or one aspect of it, like force equals mass times acceleration, like if you have a tremendous amount of force, a small amount of mass can accelerate and cause a lot of damage, and vice versa. You know what I'm saying? It's like
Yeah.
when people in a car crash will get knocked out of their shoes and they find their shoes on the floorboard. You couldn't
Yeah.
slip out of tied shoes like that, but in such an impact where you've increased one aspect of that equation, strange things happen, like straw being embedded in fences during a tornado.
Yeah, I've personally seen that actually.
And I would say a lot of times it's not something that's obvious when you go to investigate shipwrecks like this, what actually caused that. And so you have a lot of mysteries.
That fire was a huge disaster for Canada steamship lines. A lot of things changed after that, just like every disaster. But that was over 2 decades after tonight's astonishing legend, the story of the ship SS Kamloops and Old Whitey. The Camloops was originally built for the CSL subsidiary Steamships Limited in 1924 after being laid down by the Furnace Shipbuilding Company on the northeastern coast of the UK in Stockton-on-Tees. Furnace Shipbuilding was initially built to repair ships damaged in World War I, and it thrived for 62 years from 1917 to 1979. With the end of World War I in November of 1918, Furnace pivoted to building ships for the Great Lakes, and by the late 20s was building a lot of them. Now, the ships built for the Great Lakes were of a design known as lake freighters, or also canalers.
Yes.
Now, lake freighters have a very specific look. They are long, narrow, and the pilot house, where the bridge is all the way at the front, up on the bow. Now, this design for all of them was based on a boat. It's been traced back to one particular boat that was built by this guy. The boat was called the R.J. Hackett. It was built in 1869. And if you've ever seen a picture of the infamous Edmund Fitzgerald that we were talking about earlier, it was built 30 years after the Kamloops. But you know then what kind of vessel we're talking about. Although the Kamloops was very small compared to the Fitzgerald.
Right. That's another factor to keep in mind. The Kamloops was considered a small ship, but it was needed to be narrow and shorter to navigate those canals as a canaler. So,
that's right.
But here's a question. Why do the lake freighters all have their pilot houses all the way at the front at the bow?
Well, this is super fascinating. I had to look this up. So the reason that everything is all up there at the front, which is kind of silly looking, and it's weird looking in a weird way. By the way, in the back, at the very back, is the crew quarters and the fireman's quarters over the engine room in the back. So what this does is it lets the whole middle of the ship have full, easy access for loading and unloading.
Right.
So it's a long, continuous storage section, and there's no rigging to interfere with getting stuff on and off of the ship.
Well, it's like a modern-day massive container ship. You see the bridge all the way at the back. The whole rest of it is basically just stacks and stacks of containers, which it's just amazing that they can get all that to float. But apparently it's called displacement, and it works. This podcast is sponsored by the Washington Post.
You know, we spend all of our time on the fringes of belief with Astonishing Legends, immersed in hearsay, anecdotes, and folklore. But in the version of reality that I'm living in the rest of the time, I'm a bit of a news junkie. Which is why when I'm not working, I want hard, trustworthy facts on stories that are written in ways I can understand, not by bots or AI filled with typos and misinformation. And the Washington Post is my go-to for that. I've actually been a digital subscriber to the Washington Post for years on my iPhone. And the way that happened was just me trying to read articles with headlines that intrigued me over and over and finding out the vast majority of them were there. In fact, it's the only paper I'm digitally subscribed to.
Well, they are a historic paper that's known for solid journalism there. That's for sure.
I've actually probably sent 5 or 6 articles from the Post to my family this week alone. I'm pretty much always doing that, and to the point where it irritates them. But there's a lot of complex things happening in the world right now, a lot. And for me, the Washington Post is the best way to get informative background on all of it.
Well, it can be hard to find trustworthy sources these days.
It can. And the Post covers everything in depth, from the economy to climate to foreign policy and, of course, Capitol Hill, which is absolutely nuts right now. It's also really helping me stay on top of what's going on in the Middle East and also with Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah, well, it really is hard to suss out the wheat from the chaff on those topics.
It is, and that's why I like the Post for that stuff. You know, but sometimes I just need a break from working on an outline too, and I'll hit my inbox where I receive the Post For You newsletter. It's awesome because it's my very own personalized news roundup based on my interests and reading history. It's like one of those automatic playlists, but for news.
Well, that is pretty cool. And on top of that, listeners, you can actually listen to articles in addition to reading them if you want to.
Yeah, I do that too. When I'm walking the dogs or on a long drive sometimes. A lot of people think the Washington Post only covers politics, but that's not true at all. You name it, they've got it covered. From climate and culture to crosswords and cooking. The Washington Post will help you find a lot of surprising stories that you didn't even know were out there.
Now is the time to sign up for the Washington Post. Go to washingtonpost.com/legends to subscribe for just 50 cents per week for your first year. That's 80% off their typical offer, so this is truly a steal.
Once again, that's washingtonpost.com/legends to subscribe for just 50 cents per week for your first year.
We'd like to thank EmbarkVet.com for supporting Astonishing Legends. Go to EmbarkVet.com to get free shipping and save $50 on breed plus health test with promo code LEGENDS.
You know, today I was thinking about how much my wife and I love our dogs.
Okay.
And then I got to thinking about how a lot of people think of their dogs as either kids, if they don't have human kids, or they think of them as additional kids, even if they do have children.
Okay, but where are you going with this?
Well, Mother's Day is right around the corner, and I'm thinking if people out there have dog moms in their lives, an awesome gift would be a dog DNA test from Embark.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. Now I'm following you.
Right, seriously, let's back away from the cliche coffee mugs, flowers, chocolates, and socks that say something about wine on the bottom. Let's get them doggy DNA tests from the most accurate dog DNA test provider on the planet, Embark. With an Embark DNA test, moms can learn about their dog's breed mix, its genetic health risks, they actually screen for more than 250 of those, and also find and connect with other dogs who share their dog's DNA with the world's first canine relative finder.
Well, there you go. No more sad dogs on the internet searching frantically for lost siblings.
Or their parents. Dogs have it rough when it comes to that. Dogs have moms too.
That's true.
We learned so much about Nixie and Lulu when we did the Embark DNA test, mostly about breeds that were large parts of both of them that we had no idea about. It was super fascinating to look up the behavior of those breeds after that and see how it was woven into their dogonalities.
Dogonality.
Yeah, well, you can't say personality. They're dogs.
Okay, well, I'm again following you on that. All right. Well, you know what? This is an excellent idea for Mother's Day. Listeners, if there's a dog mom in your life, this is the ultimate non-cliche Mother's Day gift.
Get the dog DNA test that is trusted by millions. Right now, Embark has a limited time offer on their breed and health test for our listeners. Go to embarkvet.com to get free shipping and save $50 with promo code LEGENDS.
Visit embarkvet.com and use promo code LEGENDS to save $50 today. That's EMBARK vet.com and use promo code LEGENDS.
This is Jen Cash. Thank you for listening to Astonishing Legends. Let's get back to the show.
Well, so now we have the big picture. The Camloops, as we said, was laid down in 1925 in Northeast England by the Furnace Shipbuilding Company Limited.
Mm-hmm.
And the name for the Camloops was chosen by Agnes Black. She was at the time the daughter of the Canada Steamship Line's superintendent. Kamloops is the name of a city in British Columbia, about 150 miles northeast of Vancouver.
Yes.
Now, the word Kamloops is an Anglicization. Did I say that right?
Yeah, pretty close.
I did, right? Okay. The word Kamloops is an Anglicization of the original indigenous name applied to a trading settlement established where that city is by the Pacific Fur Company. And here's a weird little everything is connected. That's one of many fur trading companies founded by John Jacob Astor the first, which made him a wealthy man. The original indigenous name for Kamloops actually meant meeting of the waters. 15 years prior to the loss of the SS Kamloops in 1912, John Jacob Astor's great-grandson, John Jacob Astor IV, died on the Titanic. He was the wealthiest person aboard that night. Just a little strings all coming back together. It's important to point out where the name came from. I thought it was interesting that the indigenous definition meant meeting of the waters. In maritime lore, the name of the ship is always really important. It's considered bad luck, actually, if you buy a boat to change the name of it.
Well, didn't it happen with the Mary Celeste? The name was changed after it was recovered. And we talked about that back then as well. Sailing, maritime stuff, shipping, boating, all very superstitious business. That is, sailors are very superstitious because I believe, my theory is that you're dealing with such an unpredictable, force of nature that is, you're not really meant to do all this, but we figured it out as humans, and it's treacherous, but we can sometimes tame it, and sometimes the bear gets you. We've learned to navigate these spaces and master them, but sometimes Mother Nature shows us who's boss.
Yeah, it does.
And I think in this case, you do have a bit that's legendary about this particular case because of the mystery around it. But as a ship itself, if you look at it, it's like, well, this thing wasn't, it was doomed. It wasn't a very big ship. Well, yeah, it was a lake freighter, so it was relatively small, but it was a very stout ship. I want to make that point in that those in the know, the mariners had respect for the ship build itself and that it was pretty stout. But yeah, in the 1920s, the ship was only 250 feet long. And prior to 1959, again, the only way for a vessel to get from the St. Lawrence River to the lower Great Lakes of Lake Erie and Lake Ontario was through a series of Canadian-operated locks and canals, like the Welland Canal. And that was built between 1824 and 1829. That's pretty early on in American history, I would say. And that was why the Kamloops was on the smaller side, so it could fit through all that, the locks and canals. So later on in 1954, that's when the Canadian government began building the 350-mile-long St. Lawrence Seaway to make it easier for these larger vessels to get from the Atlantic into the lakes. And that opened in 1959. But again, prior to that, ships like the Kamloops were made smaller specifically for that purpose of navigatability, navigational, operational.
It's navigability.
Oh, there you go. I knew it was close. Yeah,
yes.
It was in the.
That was close.
I was in the bay, not the ballpark.
Yeah.
We're talking about why the ship may have gone down, setting the scene here. This thing was pretty stout, and it had, the lake freighter look, classic, as we said, pilot house up front, business in the back, party in the back, with the engines were the firemen, and that's not to put out the fire. That's the guys operating the engines, which were two Scotch boilers with 1,000 horsepowers and a triple expansion steam engine. So you have a main boiler. It's heating steam for the energy. And as that dissipates and starts to lose energy, that steam is exhausted into another chamber where it's done again. And then once that depletes, that goes into a third chamber. So there you go. Triple expansion if you want to build your own steam freighter. The top speed was about 9.5 knots. For you landlubbers here, it was about 11 miles per hour. So not very fast, but it would chug along. And, you're talking about trips of several hundred miles, but not ocean going. Right. And it was built to carry what they call package freight from Montreal to Fort William. And I think Fort William was the twin seated to Port Arthur at that time, right? Okay.
Yeah.
And then eventually they were combined and renamed to the illustrious and beautiful city of Thunder Bay, Ontario in 1970. And also Thunder Bay is the hometown of Paul Schaefer of Dave Letterman's The Late Show.
Is it really?
Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Well, I did.
My
I heard him
wife
mention
knows
that
him.
once.
She's worked with him.
Well,
I
there
did
you
not
go.
know he
She
was
should
from
ring
Thunder
him
Bay.
up
That's
and
crazy.
it's like, yeah, man, it's crazy, babe. There's all shipwrecks everywhere. I do like to hear stories of famous people and celebrities that come from out of the way places. It's not a dinky place.
Well, it's clearly a trade center and has been for a long time.
Well, there you go.
Because that was the end point to where all these vessels were getting to.
Right.
And the stuff was going from there by land into the country. And then the grain was coming out down from the land and going on the boats for their return trip.
It's so, for the expansion westward of not only the United States, but also of Canada, these are very pivotal areas and they get forgotten or downplayed, kind of like St. Joseph, Missouri. We'll talk about that infamous area
places we visited.
where the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe, I can't remember, it's 3 railroads. They were monumentally important at the time. And of course they fade in history when they're, other means of transportation and of goods comes in and they kind of get forgotten. But
you got it right, by the way. It's Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe.
Well, there you go.
ATSF.
Yeah. And then another odd thing I'll remember, our Canadian friends will certainly chuckle and applaud is the song Ontario. A place to stand, a place to grow, Ontario.
That's my favorite part of this episode so far.
And it's
nice work.
It's either it is for everyone else or it's the most hated. It's just there's no in between.
I've never heard that song, but I really enjoyed your rendition.
So the idea though there is that it's as there was expansion and trade going on and building up, these were important areas, and as you said, this all depended on getting goods and services to people in these growing communities. And in this case, these steamer freighters would take packages or package cargo to Fort William and then carry grain coming back on the return trip from the plains where it was grown.
Well, we found an outstanding source of information for this episode with the lofty title of the Isle Royale Submerged Cultural Resources Study, Isle Royale National Park. This was published in 1987, edited by Daniel J. Linehan. There's a lot of contributors to it that all worked on this, apparently. We have a link to a free PDF of this if you're interested in reading it for yourself. It's actually pretty fascinating. They really drilled down not only on the Kamloops, the level of detail is insane, but every other ship that sank in the region near Isle Royale.
It's also a very dangerous area.
Yes.
And I want to make a point is that I was intending to, later on in the show, to talk about the Alaska Triangle and some ships mysteriously disappearing there and returning. And then also the Michigan Triangle.
Yeah, that's not Lake Superior.
No.
I looked that up because you asked about it. That is Lake Michigan.
It is Lake Michigan, but there is a triangle and stuff goes missing and happens here. It's just treacherous weather. And dangerous waters. That's what's going on for the most part.
At this point, any dangerous body of water with bad weather, I feel like people are just throwing triangles down and be like, there's a triangle.
No.
You can draw a triangle anywhere.
Well, you need 3 points. Well,
a bunch of stuff's going to gone down.
Right, but in this case here, it just seems near Isle Royale, it's like the sink trap of the grease trap of these shipwrecks. They collect or head towards or seem to be focused around that area. And I don't know if it's just the nature of the conditions. It's just a weird environmental sailing fact. And so what we have here is that there's just a lot of ships that have gone down in that area. And so is that pointing to something supernatural, paranormal? I don't think so. But a lot of these cases that we found also have a paranormal angle to them. Just kind of minor, but the big thing here is that, yes, there's something tragic happening first.
Well, coming back to the Isle Royale Submerged Cultural Resources Study, On page 187, they actually talk about the Kamloops, and you'll see why I'm in awe of how much work they did here. This is a little bit of the specs on the Kamloops, which is interesting. Kamloops is built on the longitudinal system of framing with upper shelter and forecastle decks. The double bottom extending all fore and aft, and the peak tanks are arranged for water ballast, and a watertight cofferdam is fitted at the sides of the forehold to give added protection to the cargo to meet the severe conditions of the service, like you said, Forrest Stout. The captain's accommodation and chart room are in-house on the forecastle deck with the steering wheel in teak Texas house above. Special attention has been given to the accommodation for the officers and crew in the forecastle and engineers and firemen in the deck house aft. The whole of the accommodation is heated by steam radiators and electric lighting is to be installed. A powerful steam windlass is fitted in the forecastle and special pockets are arranged in the hull to house the anchors. The cargo gear, consisting of 4 Samson posts, each having one 5-ton derrick, is operated by one 8x12-inch and 2 7x10-inch steam cargo winches, and mooring arrangements are carried out by means of 4 6x10-inch steam mooring winches. So it's got all this stuff on the deck, and that's one of the things that we mentioned earlier. Even though we have the business in the front of navigating and the business in the back of keeping the engines running, it's meant to keep the center part open for easy loading and unloading. But in this particular case, this vessel also had its own cranes to help and winches to help load itself in case they were in a port, which at the time was probably more frequent, where there wasn't anything on the docks to help get this stuff onto the boat. It could load itself up with this stuff. So this vessel was 2,400 tons. And after being built, it finished its sea trials on the 5th of July in 1924. Now, just to give a little broader framework here, that's 3 years before the first talkie movie came out and the first year of the Winter Olympics. And on the day the Kamloops finished sea trials, Babe Ruth was famously knocked unconscious after he collided with a wall trying to catch a fly ball in Washington's Griffith Stadium in Washington, D.C. He was out cold for 5 minutes. So it just gives you like a bigger picture of what's going on in the world.
Right.
So after the sea trials, the SS Kamloops went to Copenhagen, Denmark to load up a first shipment for Steamships Limited before sailing to Montreal and Michigan. Its primary job, as we indicated earlier, was to carry freight from Montreal on the St. Lawrence River through Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, and Lake Huron, and into Lake Superior to the northern shore and what is now Thunder Bay. This involved not only the lakes, but numerous canals and channels. And Canada was still part of the British Empire at this time, and one of the things that the Kamloops was assigned to carry was goods from England that had arrived in Montreal to get those deep into Canada where people were clamoring for them, using the Great Lakes as a route.
So to give you an idea now of what the weather conditions are like, well, on December 13th, 1924, and this would be just a few months into the Kamloops' first year on the lakes, a severe storm cropped up on Lake Superior. And we're talking about winds of 50 to 60 miles per hour, lashing and thrashing the ship, temperatures going to 6 degrees below freezing. That's pretty mild. The other temperatures we're going to talk about that buffeted the Kamloops, much, much colder, but like that's cold enough, especially, in a windy, wet condition here. And at least one vessel went down in this storm. And in spite of this, though, the Kamloops, the hardy Kamloops, continued its downbound run along with 3 other vessels. One of them was called the Lethbridge, and that was the Kamloops' sister ship.
Yes, they were built at the same time.
Right.
Yeah.
And 4 other vessels took shelter north of Isle Royale during this storm, grounded intentionally, or get it into some kind of port, any port in a storm, get off the water. Well, after they emerged to sail downbound to the Sioux Locks at Sault Ste. Marie, they made it across the lake, but they became trapped in ice from the St. Mary's River right there, and tugboats had to be dispatched to get those 4 out, to pull them out. They were the last 4 to pass through the locks that season because then the ice closes off the passageway for the whole winter, and you can't do anything. No commerce happens. That's why you see this rush to let's get in as much as we can before conditions get crummy. And as I mentioned before with ice road truckers, not plugging the show, I have no connection to them, but occasionally, because I had a harrowing trip this winter myself via black ice in my car, and can relate. But the idea here is kind of the opposite, because in Alaska, if it gets too warm and the conditions become slushy, then you can't drive across that frozen water. We're actually driving on ocean. The ice is so thick you can, but if it starts to loosen up, now you're in trouble. And also other areas. So it's a weird thing where they'll get conditions of 40 to 50 below, maybe 60 below zero, and it's not great, but you need that, at least things are firm. This
Right.
points to something important here, and that's that the Kamloops operators, CSL, they always push the Kamloops and other ships to maximize the shipping season for as long as possible, as we just said. And of course, commerce and big money's involved, and it's risky, but they're willing to take that risk because it's a gamble. Like all of shipping, like you said, you could lose that anytime. You can lose people, you can get sued, insurance companies are involved. And the name for this, though, is called last tripping. So it's your last trip up there. And in April 1925, just a few months later, the Kamloops was back at it. And it had a pretty uneventful year of shipping, other than being successful. Now, however, 1926 was different, and this would be the last year before the Kamloops vanished. The season ended for the Kamloops with it stuck on the ice on December 3rd, 1926. And this time it wasn't just 4 ships. It was over 100 ships that were stuck in the ice. They were all caught again in that ice in the channel that takes the ships from Sault Ste. Marie toward Lake Huron. And it's just about the halfway point in the channel between Lake Superior and Lake Huron. And this is about 20 miles southeast of Sault Ste. Marie. So, yeah, that's a large number of ships, but getting trapped in ice was a fairly common event, and they are prepared for it. Sometimes if it's bad enough, or if you're grounded, depending on what the cargo is, again, pointing back to that Alaska, one of the Alaska stories, that you can offload the cargo for safekeeping if you think that the ship's going to get crushed or damaged, and offload it with your own means rather than having to go to port and put it on land for safekeeping and ride the winter out, which, man, that's not in the job description.
Yeah.
But it is. But in this case, this is the largest ice jam in history for the Great Lakes. Even tugboats struggled in that ice, which was, get this, up to 12 feet thick. That's hard to wrap your head around. But again, thick enough to drive a semi on. So not in this case, though. But 100 ships, that's a lot of people, a lot of crew members adding up. And in this case, it would be about 2,000 people. And then consider, how do you survive on a ice-locked ship?
Yeah.
You are depending on the supplies that are on those ships already that were meant for the voyage and a little extra.
Which hasn't happened yet. Yeah.
Which hasn't happened yet, but you're planning for it. It's like, again, I'm going to say it's very common, but those are limited. You had limited space on a ship. It's like what we talked about, a friend of a friend who was stationed on a submarine, a U.S. naval sub. My friend asked him, tell us something about submarines you don't know. It's like, well, probably what you don't imagine is that when we go to put out to sea, every nook and cranny has got cans of food and other supplies nudged everywhere. Because by the time you get to the end of your journey, you will have used all that up. But to get out there, every space conceivable has something stored in it that you will use on that trip. And that's just the way those operate. So in this case here, you have supplies dwindling down, and there's no way to resupply those provisions. Tugboats shuttled truckloads of food to the stuck vessels, which included the SS Kamloops. So to give you an idea of the timeline, this is now on December 5th, 2 days later, 1926, 7 inches of snow fell to make matters worse. And now there's 40 upbound and 65 downbound boats stuck in the channel at this point. And then ships begin to run out of coal to power their engines, which keeps everybody warm and the engines running. They wouldn't be able to make way if they got unstuck without coal. So figure, okay, so now you're free from the ice, but now you have nothing to power the steam engines, which run on coal. So you need coal as a factor here. And the downbound ships then tried to buy coal from the upbound ships. And so this kind of the ship to ship, all stuck in the ice, kind of formed a little bit of an ecosystem, a small economy here, which I kind of like. I like the idea that they all kind of band together. They're all in trouble to a degree, but, you know, they can ride this out a little bit if they cooperate. Do you remember the Evergreen?
Yes.
That got stuck in the Suez Canal sideways in March of 2021. Now, we recently had a catastrophe that happened with a ship losing power and crashing into a bridge.
Yes, in Baltimore.
Right. That's just to give you an idea of, like, that equation of massive bulk and matter losing control and causing a tremendous amount of damage and loss of life.
Yes.
So that happened in March of 2021, messed everything up for quite a while. And then, like, it's that old, it's the Austin Powers joke where the guy gets the electric golf cart lodged in the hallway, and then you're making 100 different little correction turns. Well, how do you get it unstuck? Well, same thing's happening here in the ice. The Coulee, it was another lake freighter, about the same size, 261 feet long. That got stuck sideways in the channel. So even if the ice wasn't there, Scott likes to say, none shall pass.
Yeah.
None
They
shall
were
pass.
screwed.
You're screwed up. So it's becoming a big mess here. And the Detroit Free Press reported on December 7th, 1926, that members of the Lake Carriers Association, they were losing $50,000 a day from the ice jam. So now if you calculate that for inflation and today's prices here, daily, that would be $882,000 they're losing daily. So the researchers that put the study together, the Royale Submerged Cultural Resources Study, very descriptive, you know what you're getting. They concluded that the Camloops must have been released on December 11th, 1926, about 9 days after being trapped in the ice. And that was pretty much the end of the working year for the Camloops in 1926.
So now we get to 1927, its final year on the lakes. And on April 7th, a few months after this, to December, everything shuts down. You got to wait until the channels can open back up. So on April 7th of 1927, an icebreaker opened the channel for what would be the SS Kamloops last season. Although Wikipedia reports that the Kamloops changed ownership near the end of the 1926 year, and it did, because the registry changed from Steamships Limited to Canada Steamship Lines, or CSL, the fact of the matter is it's more complicated than that. The officers of both of those companies were the same. On top of that, when the Isle Royale researchers looked into the paperwork, they found a mortgage for the exchange for an astonishing $50 million. Who here thinks the SS Kamloops was worth just shy of what today would be equivalent to almost $1 billion? I don't think so.
You did the upsell math on that. So,
yeah, there's some shady, it was 826 million in today's dollars. Interestingly, the Isle Royale Submerged Cultural Resources Study has the real scoop here. They clearly didn't want to call this out, but they're saying, okay, this boat traded hands for $50 million between these two companies that have the same officers on both sides of the deal. And this is from page 191 of their study. The dealings between steamship companies and the various financial institutions have not been researched by historians. The relationship between Steamships Limited and Canada Steamship Lines Limited should interest historians studying the development of capitalistic enterprise on the lakes, for the officers were the same for both companies and the addresses of their principal places of business were the same. The details of this arrangement should shed light on the business practices of ship owners of the period.
Yeah, it sounds like some financial shenanigans going on here.
Yeah, they're moving money from one company to another, but that's what everybody does, I guess. We can't say for sure what happened there, but the mortgage papers show that the loan for the Kamloops paid by CSL to Steamships Limited was for that amount, $50 million, $1924, not 2024, $50 million back in 1924 at 6%. Now the rate is right for the time. The Camloops, though, was clearly not a billion-dollar vessel. So now, it's December of 1927, and again, because Forrest and I both study film history as a marker, this is 2 months before the first talkie, Al Jolson's The Jazz Singer was released. Also 8 months after one of my favorite films of all time, the epic sci-fi film Metropolis, which was silent, obviously, because that preceded The Jazz Singer. That was directed by Fritz Lang at a cost of over $21 million of today's dollars. Without Metropolis, no Blade Runner. I digress. Right. But aside, just think about this. Fritz Lang could have made Metropolis 39 times for the purported value of the SS Kamloops in 1926. Now, again, we're in 1927. The SS Kamloops operators are officially now Canada Shipping Lines, or CSL, and they are pushing the season again to its absolute limit. The official loss of life on the Kamloops reports 22 people, 20 crew and 2 women, who we think today would have been called crew as well, as one of them was essentially the chief stew and then the second her assistant. And the captain was William Bryan. So according to the Isle Royale Shipwrecks page, this is on Captain Ken Merriman's website, superiortrips.com, the Kamloops was loaded up with paper mill machinery, pipe, shoes, and tar paper, and then the deck on top of that was heavily loaded with fencing material.
And an unusual amount of lifesavers.
Not lifesavers, the actual lifesavers, but the candy lifesavers.
The candies, which is ironic.
By the way, if you want to visit Lake Superior and check all this out for yourself, Captain Merriman's 33-foot Owens cruiser, the Hey Boy, is the way to go. They actually have a plan to circumnavigate the lake this year and are headed out on May 17th in just a few days as of this posting. We'll hear more about Captain Merriman and the Hey Boy later. This podcast is brought to you by Squarespace, and Squarespace also brings you the websites for the Midnight Library and Richard Haddam's Paranormal Bookshelf.
That's right. We talked about Rich's new Squarespace website last time, and both his and the Midnight Library sites look fantastic. And we both know from being on the back end or under the hood that both sites work dependably and easily and offer all the tools both Rich and Miranda Merrick need to present their episodes, engage with and grow their audiences, and sell their merchandise. Speaking of which, does Rich have any merch yet? Because his logo is terrific, and who wouldn't love an illustrated Rich on their t-shirt, mug, or hat? Especially Rich.
Especially Rich. You know what? He is working on merch. I know he's anxious to get it out there. So when he gets that going, Squarespace is going to be able to help him just like it would be able to help you do the rest. They have all the site integrations necessary so you can sell just about anything. And whatever you're selling, any business person knows that once a customer sees your product beautifully presented and wants to buy it, you have to make the purchase process as easy and secure as possible, or you're going to lose them and never get them back. That's why Squarespace offers flexible payments. Make checkout seamless for your customers with simple but powerful payment tools. Accept credit cards, PayPal, Apple Pay, and in eligible countries, offer customers the option to buy now and pay later with Afterpay and ClearPay.
You'll be just like a regular big-time, big-name store. But what if you don't have physical items to sell? Maybe it's a service, or you want to impart your professional knowledge for a fee, or sell your writing, your music, or your photos. Or maybe you just like to charge membership dues for whatever club you got going. With Squarespace, you can sell exclusive content on your site by adding a paywall to sell memberships or courses, or sell files your customers can download, like PDFs, music, or ebooks.
Yeah, imagine Richard Haddam teaches screenwriting, or Miranda Merrick's Midnight Library potion mixing courses.
Yes, with wonderfully spooky how-to videos for both Rich and Miranda. And this is what we're talking about. Squarespace lets you upload video content, organize your video library, and showcase your content on beautiful video pages. You can even sell access to your video library by adding a paywall to your content, whether it's a regular video library or a midnight video library.
And that's another rule of good business. Give out a sample, then charge for the rest. So start making money for your creations and services with Squarespace. All you need to do to get started is go to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/legends to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.
That's squarespace.com/legends to save 10% off your first purchase, and you can use code LEGENDS too.
You know, when you do your spring cleaning and you move something like the toaster oven out of the way and you see all those crumbs, loose Cheerios, the flotsam, and maybe some jetsam, you wipe it all up, set things straight again, and you ask yourself, how long has this crap been hidden here? How could we be living like this?
I ask myself that question constantly. How have I been living like this? And I so hear you on that. Life's necessities and finances get messy, but we can catch the things that have slipped through the cracks like crumbs and wasting money. It feels good to start over.
It's cathartic.
Yeah.
It feels great to set things in order again and clear out the deadwood. Kind of like when you cancel something that's been on auto pay and you haven't used it in a long time, racking up charges and silently draining the family budget. And as you always say, you can't beat yourself up because you didn't know then that a mess was hidden and there was a better way. But we're offering you a way right now to get rid of a messy and unnecessary expense and put things right again. And that's by switching to Mint Mobile.
Yes, when you find out you've been paying a fortune for wireless and you didn't have to because Mint Mobile has phone plans for $15 a month when you purchase a 3-month plan, well, don't dwell on the waste. Just switch and look forward to the savings. Also look forward to the premium wireless service that Scott and I enjoy, because the only difference we've noticed since we switched to Mint is more money in our bank accounts.
It's time to switch to Mint Mobile and get unlimited talk, text, and data for $15 a month. Switching is easy, and so are the savings. All plans come with high-speed data, and that unlimited talk and text is delivered on the nation's largest 5G network.
Use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with all of your existing contacts. And to get this new customer offer and your new 3-month unlimited wireless plan for just $15 a month, you need to go to mintmobile.com/AL.
That's mintmobile.com/AL.
Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/AL.
$45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 a month.
New customers on first 3-month plan only.
Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on the unlimited plan.
Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply.
See Mint Mobile for details.
Good evening. My name's Adam.
And my name's Matt.
And when we're not researching the paranormal
or recording graveyard tales,
we're listening to the Podfathers.
Now let's get back to Scott and Forrest.
So the Kamloops passed through the Welland Canal about 7 miles west of Niagara Falls on an upbound trip on December 1st at 9:30 a.m. The Welland Canal is the one that the Kamloops was built to maximum specs for. The Royale Submerged Cultural Resources Study cites that fact as being from the Detroit Free Press. Now, they cite multiple newspapers in that study, so again, see the free PDF and our links to drill down further on those sources if you want to. The vessel then made its way through what they call the Soo, S-O-O, on December 4th at 11:30 a.m., along with another vessel, a 345-foot bulk freighter called the Quedoc, Q-U-E-D-O-C.
Quedoc, like I said. I like to say Quebecois as well.
Quebecois. Quedoc. Yeah, it's probably the Quedoc, right?
Yeah, well, it's right, owing to Quebec.
Now, the Soo, the S-O-O that I said earlier, is the name of the locks on the St. Mary's River in Sault Ste. Marie. And these are the last locks you pass through when you're upbound or heading north from Lake Huron to Lake Superior. Captain Brian of the Kamloops wrote his wife from there and said that the weather was very bad. The crews all had the ice jam from last year firmly still in their minds. You can imagine the trauma of that. Probably had some PTSD from it as well. There was a rumor that the season this year would end November 30th for safety reasons, but no such luck. From page 191 of the resources study, executives of Canada Steamship Lines denied the rumor. A company official was quoted in the Fort William Daily Times Journal on November 29th. Quote, "We will run our ships as long as the weather holds good and as long as there is grain to carry. The experience we had last year does not deter us because we realize that a thing like that might not happen again for another 50 years, end quote.
Well, then guess what happens? Again, this is all big business. Insurance companies raised all of their rates at midnight on November 30th of that year. So they knew what can happen.
Yes.
They don't have to pay out. Yeah, people want money. They don't have to give it away. That's just how things work. But of course, they raise their rates. If you ever ding your car, guess what happens? Well, then a massive cold front with northeast winds at 36 miles per hour. Not terrible, but 36 miles per hour is enough to blow over your lawn furniture. That happens on December 1st, 1927. And then the temperatures drop to about 8 degrees Fahrenheit. And then folks know, the mariners know, a massive storm is coming. It's on its way. And then what happens again? Insurance rates go up again on December 5th. And this causes a panic among the downbound shippers in Fort William to get that grain loaded quickly and then try and get underway down toward Sault Ste. Marie before midnight.
Yes, and at that point, all navigation aids and lightkeepers were removed from the lakes. But coming back a few days, back to December 7th, the northeast wind began blowing at 20 to 30 miles per hour again for a second storm now coming through. At this point, it's 10 below zero at Port Arthur and Fort William. Now, keep in mind, Port Arthur and Fort William are up on the north end of the lake, and the Kamloops is down on the south end. We're talking about the area where the boats are trying to go downbound with grain, and the Kamloops is trying to come up to that area, but the storm is the same problem for both of them. Winds accelerated all the way to 80 miles per hour as the storm turned into a full-blown blizzard.
Okay, now you're talking.
Yeah. And again, the details are coming from the cultural resources study here. These guys are awesome. The temperatures plummeted as low as 38 degrees below zero. Over 30 people died on land during this storm. Listen to this section from page 192 of the study. The situation on the lakes grew worse as the storm raged the 7th and 8th. Damage reports began filtering in on the 9th. The bulk freighter Agawa was aground in Lake Huron, being pounded to pieces. All efforts to rescue the 23 stranded crew members were thwarted by the weather. At least 20 other vessels were in distress or missing. 7 downbound grain ships were overdue at Detroit. Winds of 84 miles an hour broke 4 vessels and a passenger steamer from their moorings at Detroit. An unidentified boat, which turned out to be the bulk freighter E.W. Oglebay, ran aground at Shot Point. Martian, another bulk freighter, ran aground in Thunder Bay. Altadoc was aground at Keweenaw Point. In Lake Erie, 3 steamers ran aground with a total of 81 men aboard. That's from the Detroit Free Press, December 10th, 1927. In all, 5 vessels were eventually declared a total loss by the underwriters. Kamloops was among the missing. So that's from page 192 of the study. Now, the crew of freighter Winnipeg reached their destination of Port Arthur, again now known as Thunder Bay, on the northwest edge of Lake Superior on December 9th. This was the destination for most of the vessels upbound on Superior. The Winnipeg crew said they had seen the Kamloops 3 days earlier on December 6th in Whitefish Bay. Now, that's the bay just west of Sault Ste. Marie on the eastern end of the lake. That's the last safe harbor to hold up in before setting out across the lake for Port Arthur. That day, the Winnipeg apparently was just a few hundred yards from foundering on rocks in Whitefish Bay in heavy fog. And when they got to Port Arthur, they had tons of ice on the deck, and the ship was white from all of the frost. Again, from page 192 of the study, a crewman of Winnipeg described his 5-day ordeal on that crossing. I have never seen anything like it in my 20 years of sailing. The storm was bad enough, but to get a combination of gales, fogs, and 20 degrees below zero weather all at the same time is something that has given many a mariner nerves this last few days. So as you can see, this is like the perfect storm is happening on the lake. All these ships are out there. I don't know if people have seen that movie or read that book. We mentioned it recently in the Third Man series, but this is the same kind of scenario that's happening. Now, when December 12th rolled around, there was still no sign of the Kamloops and no messages of any kind either because the Kamloops didn't have a radio. They weren't required on lake ships with less than 50 aboard. So I guess 49 people is okay to drown. If we get to 50, we let spring for a radio.
Oh, come on now. Well, look, for thousands of years prior to that, ships sailed just fine without a radio. Of course, that would be handy. No, here's
but once it was invented, it should be there. I mean, come
on. This is the 20s. You know, it's like it's still kind of catching on.
Yeah.
Yes, the steamers were solidly built, but it did not have all the bells and whistles.
Or radios.
Well, something I wanted to mention later on we'll find is that, you know, there's some mariners or people in the know that said like, it wouldn't have made much of a difference anyway, not having a radio. But again, this would have been handy because as in one case, the Cadoc could have signaled them better, but they didn't see anything. Well, at this point, 3 other vessels are missing, the Saskatoon, the Brookton, and a tugboat named the Champlain. And the Saskatoon and Brookton also belong to CSL, or Canadian Steamship Lines. However, all 3 of those would turn up.
Yes, and going back to another section from page 193 of the study. The ordeal of the survivors of the wrecked vessels Altadoc, Agawa, and Lampton give a view of the conditions the Kamloops faced. The Coast Guard dory that attempted the removal of Altadoc's crew became frozen in the ice itself and was freed only after 16 attempts by the cutter Crawford to break a lane to the boat. Agawa's crew was trapped aboard without food or heat for 3 days, and during that time, the stranded vessel was covered with ice 4 to 6 feet thick. The captain, who retired after that voyage, reported being battered by 40-foot waves that swept away the smokestack, spars, and top deck. That's from the Detroit Free Press, December 12, 1927. 2 suicides were reported aboard Lampton by crew members unable to withstand the severe conditions. These deaths, reported as suicides, may have been attempts to swim to shore. Now, this was fascinating. I was like, what? I want to understand this better. And I found through one of our newspaper.com subscriptions, the Sioux Daily Star. This is from Sault Ste. Marie, Canada, Tuesday, December 13th, 1927. The headlines, everything is just about all the boats in the storm. The top headline on this particular issue of the paper, which we'll have in our links, is Kamloops wrecked, thanks KDOC captain. But, so I'm going to read that in a little bit, but listen to this article. This is about the people that they're saying, well, did they commit suicide or not? This article is about the Lampton. Quote, "Goodbye, gang," said Moon and Baird as they jumped from the Lampton to death. That's the subheadline on that. I want to read a little bit of this section. "Well, goodbye, gang," were the last words of Elmer Baird from Weirton, oiler, and Ivan C. Moon, Owen Sound, wheelsman, as dressed in life suits, they jumped overboard Friday afternoon from the Lampton, aground on Parisian Shoal, in an effort to swim to shore to get relief for their comrades who had been stranded on the reef since 4 o'clock the previous afternoon. This was the story told by their comrades who reached the Sioux this evening from Goulet Bay, where they landed after leaving their ship on Saturday afternoon in the one remaining lifeboat, the other boat having been washed overboard when they attempted to lower it just after the boat struck the shoal. The whole story is one of heroism, hardship, and peril, which has rarely been equaled in the history of the Great Lakes. The Lampton left Fort William downbound with a cargo of grain Tuesday afternoon at 4:30, and at 4 o'clock Wednesday morning ran into a blinding snowstorm through which it crawled along at a snail's pace, unable to see where it was going and uncertain of its location. Thursday afternoon at 4 o'clock, the vessel ran on the Parisian Shoal with a terrific crash. Watchman Walter Collins, who was going forward at the time, was almost washed overboard, grabbing a rail just in time to save himself. Mate Forbes had to climb on a spar to save himself as he came along the deck to warn those in the forward cabins, and his lifesuit was washed out of his hands. Oral Ransom, a deckhand, was another who was almost washed overboard by the waves. He was asleep when the crash came, but immediately put on his lifesuit and came on deck. The boat was already a mass of ice as a result of having been so long tossed about by the waves in the midst of the blizzard, the ice being in places 2 feet thick. The general opinion expressed by the members of the crew was that the vessel could not have gone much further at the best, and if it had not run aground, would have foundered before long, weighed down as it was by tons of ice. Quote, I wouldn't have given 25 cents for our chances of coming through alive, even before the crash, end quote, said Chief Engineer J.F. Duncan of St. Catharines. So after they ran ashore, skipping down later to the later section here about the 2 men that jumped over, the storm kept up, and while for a minute the haze over the water lifted on Thursday night, and a light at Whitefish Point was visible, steam from the water soon clouded their view again. Both that night and Friday night, huge flares made of black paint and oakum were lighted on the roof of the afterhouse in the hope of attracting the attention of passing vessels, but apparently they were unseen. Friday, just about noon, Ransom and George Eads, a fireman, made their way forward and hacked their way into the pilot house to take a look at the barometer and to secure the binoculars. It was just after that Baird and Moon, who had seen land when getting coal for the lone fire in the galley, and who thought they had distinguished a mill on the shore, made their heroic but ill-fated attempt to swim ashore. To them it seemed a short distance, but actually it was about 11 miles. They wore their working clothes, and over these their good clothes, and on top of these their life suits, and with a rope tied around their waist to keep them together, with about 10 feet to play on, they jumped overboard, despite the protests of their companions. They have not been seen since.
Well, it doesn't sound like suicide so much as trying to just escape.
It's misinformation, I think, which happens in these cases, as we know from doing the show, and just in general, when news is coming out about all kinds of crazy events like this, you think about all these boats or whatever, there's all kinds of misinformation mixed in. But it does give you a good sense of how severe the situation was. We can't get this kind of information from the Camloops because it was lost, but it's reasonable to think that all these same things were happening to the Camloops.
And I was going to bring up not overboard, but overboat.
Yes, this is a 1927 article, I think.
That's right.
I mean, it could be a typo, but it seemed intentional. Overboat.
No, I think it's an acceptable term of the time.
Yeah, it makes sense. You're overboat, you're overboard.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
But so they had a little precaution there with the suits and the rope tying, but not necessarily the goodbye cruel world. It's more
right, exactly.
Let's see if we can strike out and survive this thing.
By the same token, it does seem like a little bit they could have been a little delirious and maybe having delusions of just being freaked out and in shock and thinking that they could swim what was 11 miles in this frigid lake water in the middle of a blizzard.
Right.
I could see where people are just like, well, they had to have known. It's like, I think maybe more they were just in shock and a little delirious probably.
Well, anyway, at this point, on December 12th, the search for the Kamloops officially gets underway, and a few vessels and possibly an aircraft were involved. So we're late enough in the in the era of travel that aircraft can be involved.
Yes.
And at least one, I believe, from the local government there was dispatched to take an aerial view. And most involved, though, thought the Kamloops had been lost near Isle Royale. And that's the most logical place. People were thinking like, well, if anybody is going to have to beach the thing or get off, like that's a suitable point, or maybe it's just drifted to that catch-all, as we just said. And Isle Royale is the largest island in Lake Superior at just over 200 square miles. It's about 45 miles long, 9 miles wide, and then it's situated in a way that it protects what was at the time the twin cities of Port Arthur and Fort William. So think of it also not as a large island, but also like a breakwater. So it's protecting what's behind it, and it's a good place to take shelter from on the water. And the Isle Royale, oddly enough, has a ranger station simply named Windigo.
Yes.
Didn't expect that.
I want to mention there's another famous story about Isle Royale and a couple that was abandoned on it. Lost colony style. These people were supposed to, were sent there to survey something, or the folks that had sent them there, of course, the people with the money, were supposed to come back and didn't come back. And the husband died and the woman had to survive like Naked and Afraid style for a long time. The woman had written an account of what happened to her, and it was written into a book. and then stricken from following versions of that book. I purchased the first edition of that book 3 days ago, and I'm expecting it in a week or two. And I'm planning to make that our next junk drawer. I know we haven't done one in a long time, but I'm going to read that section. It only exists in that first edition. And it's not a very well-known book, so it wasn't very expensive for the first edition. It's apparently signed by the author. More details on that later, but our next junk drawer, we'll talk about what this woman went through, abandoned on Isle Royale. And it's only 13 miles from the Canadian mainland.
Right.
But their canoe was washed away and they were stuck on it and there was no civilization on it and they had basically been abandoned. So that's a little side story, a little tangent, and that's something that we'll bring up on the next junk drawer. I know you guys think we're probably never doing a junk drawer again. It's been a long time. There's been a lot going on. We'll talk about that on the junk drawer too. And a junk drawer is available on Patreon, for the record. So
nice plug. The Kamloops was set out upbound. It was at the Sault. We're talking about the locks of Sault Ste. Marie with the Cadoc. The captain of the Cadoc, R. Simpson, he told the Owen Sound Daily Sun-Times the following, which was published on December 13th of 1927. So now we're getting into the winter here. The Cadoc passed upbound December 4th. Beside her was the Kamloops, upbound, loaded with package freight, with 21 men aboard and captained by William Bryan. So there's a confirmation of the captain's name there. The Cadoc was leading, and the Kamloops was 1/4 of a mile astern. Now, at 10 o'clock Tuesday night, December 6th, the lookout on the steamer Cadoc suddenly saw dark mass ahead and gave the alarm immediately. The Cadoc turned sharply to avoid running head-on into the rocks, at the same time blowing the danger signal to the Kamloops. A north gale was blowing, there was a heavy sea, and it was rough going. The visibility was poor on account of the frost fog, and it was not known if the Kamloops saw the rock or heard the signal. The Kamloops has not been seen or heard of since. She had no wireless aboard, meaning no radio. So here you go. They tried to signal, and this reminds me a lot of those cases where, maybe even Flight 19, where something seemingly obvious or easy, like get a signal, fly into the sun, not away from the sun, whatever it is, or use that to judge east and west. Something that seems obvious happens but was not heard, but you don't know the conditions there. Why the Kamloops did not see the signal from the Cadoc. Because they clearly saw this coming ahead. Well, why didn't the Kamloops? They're not that far behind. Why didn't they make a turn? Why did they head straight on into it, apparently? And why didn't they hear the signal, blowing the danger signal? So all these, but you weren't there. All these factors seem obvious to us now. But a lot of strange things happen, especially with maritime and aeronautical disasters, or just weird things. I always remember a story about also weird places where things happen, like the island of Palmyra, that book I gave you, And the Sea Will Tell.
Yes.
In the very foreword of the book, they're talking about just weird things that happened. It was a World War II stop-off point, depot for a time being, but it's just a very weird and treacherous little island, and just the strange things that happens. Like after one, I think it was a PBY float plane that landed there, a Navy plane. They disembarked, they got their load off onto the island, and then they took off from the water, and instead of going the route that they should have towards where they were supposed to be going, civilization, another naval base, they went in the totally opposite direction. And people on the ground, like on the island, were like, what are those guys doing? Like, that's the wrong way. That goes out into nothing.
Right.
And I'm not sure if they were ever heard of again. And it's just like odd things that happen, but you don't know what was going on then. It's just like, well, that didn't make a lot of sense. Why did this happen? So you can't really judge by common sense what you think should have happened. It's just, in this case, it was just tragic that they didn't get any signal, headed straight into a really bad patch of weather here. Well, right after this, ships began looking for the Kamloops around Keweenaw Point on the Keweenaw Peninsula, which is the northernmost point of Michigan's UP or Upper Peninsula. You know, people, if they visualize it, they think of looking down on a U.S. map. Michigan is like the mitten, right? The left-handed mitten.
Yes.
So above that is a very large peninsula or point or spur of land called the UP. And that is the Upper Peninsula. Very lovely area, I guess. Kind of rugged, wild, good place to go camping and hiking. It's about 40 miles southeast of Isle Royale, and this is a logical place, though, for the Kamloops to wind up in its search for safety in the storm. So, again, to the knowledgeable mariner and those in the know, it's like that's a very likely place that the Kamloops is going to end up. However, there are more than 300 square miles of water that were searched and 1,000 miles of shoreline to no success, no avail. So a lot of area and territory, water and land were searched. Nothing crops up.
Yeah, so now it's definitely gone. They've done some preliminary searching. They found nothing. There's all kinds of speculation going on from other mariners about what might have happened. Again, this is from page 194 of the study. And this was published in the Houghton Daily Mining Gazette, December 14th, 1927. Marine men agree that the only hope for the safety of the Kamloops is the chance it might have made a successful run to the North Canadian shore, where it either ran ashore or is laying to in some isolated harbor, probably frozen in or is run aground somewhere on the Keweenaw. That's one section of what people are saying. Witnesses had reported that the Kamloops was heavily loaded, including a heavy deck load, which that's the fencing that would have been on the top deck. And this next bit will tell you a little bit about why that is risky. From page 195 of the study, a well-known mariner later added in the Sioux Daily Star, December 17, 1927, the Kamloops went up the lake with a deck load of fence wire, and I am of the opinion that this is what swamped her. The wire was piled high, and water washing over the deck would immediately freeze there. It would be impossible to remove it, and the cargo and ice would make one huge, heavy, and solid mass. It would be impossible to remove the ice or the deck load under such conditions. Other boats have nearly come to grief in Lake Superior from the same cause. I suggest this as being responsible for the loss of the Kamloops, and I believe I am right. The Kamloops became overweighted with the wire and ice and turned over and sank. That was quoted from a, quotes, well-known mariner, end quote, maybe somebody who didn't want to.
That makes the most sense to me. Because imagine water, the wire providing a framework, literally, for ice to build up and trapping the ice. And then now you have not only the heaviness of the wire itself, but water, ice, extremely heavy. Yes. And as it builds up, and now you're top heavy. It's what I talk about. Now you've tipped that equation. And now you're too top heavy, and it's not seaworthy. It's not good going. And, you know, they should have known better.
Yeah, it's overloaded.
Right.
It's technically overloaded. So here's another point of view about what might have happened. This is from the speculation of the mariners of the Lakehead, as reported in the Port Arthur News Chronicle, December 16th, 1927, one day earlier from the prior bit. Unless something unforeseen has happened, broken steering gear or sprung plates, the Kamloops could have made some beach or shoreline, is the general opinion of mariners. The Kamloops was a staunch vessel, heavily loaded perhaps, but nonetheless the ship could have been able to weather the storm or seek shelter. Mariners do not think the captain of the Kamloops would allow sufficient ice to form on their decks to put her in danger of sinking. He probably knew his position, and, if danger of that kind had arisen, it is more than likely the captain would have made a run for shore to beach his vessel, is another opinion. That's an interesting take, but I don't know how you prevent the ice from forming. There's no technology for that at that point.
No, but I think what they're saying is before it got out of hand, he would look to beach the vessel.
Right. Good point.
Who knows? Yeah.
The Canada Steamship Line's Toronto superintendent stated, quote, "We have every hope of hearing from the Kamloops yet," end quote. He actually leaned on the lack of a radio as a positive thing, because if they were safe, he thought if they were stuck in the ice or run aground for safety, they wouldn't be able to report that because there's no wireless.
Well, that's what I was saying before. Yeah. It's like, well, would it made a difference? It would have helped. I would have had one rather than not, but
yeah,
some in the know saying like, that wouldn't have, don't lean on that. Wouldn't have made a difference.
Well, the shipping community was united in their desire to keep searching for the Kamloops. They really came together. The captain of the aforementioned tug, the Champlain, which at one point had been thought missing itself, Henry Gehl, I think Gehl, not sure if I'm saying that right.
Or Gell.
Captain Henry Gehl wanted every bay on Isle Royale searched. Another tug captain thought it would be ice-locked along the northeastern shore of the isle. That's the one that faces Port Arthur. There was a 15-mile stretch of rocks that would make it impossible for a ship to get ashore on that section, and that's what that captain thought. Another tug was sent out by CSL on December 16th to check both Isle Royale and then Keweenaw again on Michigan's UP. Now, keeping in mind, the last time the Kamloops was seen was December 6th, before it even set out across Lake Superior. There is one odd bit of news from the crew of a vessel known as Martian, which we mentioned earlier. They had said they almost collided with the Kamloops in heavy fog on December 9th. This story is confusing, though, because the same reports say that Martian ran aground in Thunder Bay on the 7th or 8th. So not sure what's going on there. The tug James Whalen searched again all around Isle Royale while on a mission to pick up lighthouse keepers for the end of the 1927 season. They found nothing and returned to Port Arthur on December 22nd. Just a little note here, Captain Bryan's wife had been expecting him home by December 10th for the holidays. Well, the public became extremely concerned. They were mad that radios weren't required on the ships. They felt that CSL wasn't looking hard enough, and they thought the ship may be icebound somewhere. CSL pushed back, saying they were doing everything they could. Remember Ernest Shackleton's famous story of survival we referenced in the Third Man Syndrome? That was only 10 years prior to this, so the whole world likely knew those men survived years of being trapped on the ice. It had proved to the world that long-term survival was possible in a similar environment. So a lot of folks are probably thinking, they're out there. We just got to keep looking. We got to find them. Well, the day after the Whaling had returned from its search of Isle Royale, there was a rumor fishermen had seen the Kamloops ashore on Manitou Island. Now, Manitou Island is at the very eastern end of the Keweenaw Peninsula. Again, Michigan's UP. It sticks out at the end there. It juts up into the lake, and it would have been on the way to Isle Royale and Port Arthur for the Kamloops. So it makes sense that they might have beached there had they been in trouble. But after 3 days of searching, no trace of them was found on Manitou Island. In fact, they only saw two things there. I think it was a hawk and a goat. It was the only living things they saw as they circled Manitou Island. Again, from page 198 of the study. The losses of the season were summarized with the Marquette Daily Mining Journal, providing a picture of what mariners of the next season might expect. This is from December 24th, 1927. The bet with the Storm King lost again. The navigation season has come to a close with the wreckage of 5 steamers and hundreds of thousands of bushels of grain wasted on Lake Superior's and Lake Huron's bleak waters and shores. One ship, the Kamloops, presumably on the bottom of Lake Superior with 20 men, 2 women, and valuable cargo. Okay, so there you go. That's 22 people. If they're saying, so that's 22 people in there. 20 men, 2 women, and valuable cargo, and the expense of another ice blockade on the debit side of the shipping ledger. The fad of last tripping claimed 4 victims this year, landmarks which will be pointed out in 1928 when the merciless wire ticks out again the order for that last cargo. So that tells the story of the Kamloops and its disappearance. Nothing of the ship would be found for 15 months.
So in January of 1928, matters relating to the loss of the Kamloops had to be undertaken, which of course includes compensation for the widows and families who lost someone. And as we said earlier, it was believed that there was 22 people aboard, 20 men and 2 women. Jeanette Nettie Grafton, Nettie was her nickname, would have been what we refer to today as Chief Stew, and back then she'd be known as Chief Stewardess. And Alice Bettridge would have been Second Stew in today's terms, or back then she would have been the Assistant Stewardess. So she was second in command and stewardessing. But Grafton was planning to make 1927 her last season on the lakes, according to the Isle Royale study. And it was only Alice Bettridge's second season. She was just 22. And at the beginning of the 1928 season in April, Canada Steamship Lines planned to resume the search for any trace of the Kamloops. And at this point, a recovery effort, although a few people still held out hope that survivors could be found. Stranger things have happened. But CSL was again going to check the entire shoreline of Isle Royale, as well as the north shore of Lake Superior, where the prevailing current would have taken any flotsam. So again, these people know the currents and where the water would take stuff, and that was their best guess. And turns out they were pretty close. Well, insurance claims were paid out for the loss in the amount of $214,009, or just under $4 million in today's dollars. The Kamloop itself was insured for $168,100. Apparently not $50 million, even though that's what the CSL paid Steamships Limited for the vessel in 1926. And a month after the season began, and 15 months since the Kamloops had vanished, a fisherman named David Lynn, working around Isle Royale, reported that he had found 2 bodies and thought that they may have been connected to the Kamloops. So then the Coast Guard cutter Crawford, flag at half-mast, collected the bodies and brought them to Port Arthur.
Yes, and here's a segment from the Duluth News-Tribune. This was published on May 28, 1928. Lieutenant Woods of the Crawford provides the details of the recovery. The bodies, both wearing life preservers with Kamloops stenciled on them, were reported located near 12 o'clock point on Amygdaloid Island on the north shore of Isle Royale. They were found along with wreckage of the lost steamer. Fragments of superstructure, including the top of the wheelhouse, a spar with a flag on which was printed Kamloops, and a lifeboat were found in the area between Green Isle and Hawk Island. Captain Christensen stated that the wreckage includes all of the boat's hatches, half a lifeboat, and 5 or 6 pairs of oars. The beach is covered with medicine, candy, toothpaste, and foodstuff carried by the steamer. The reason the steamer was not found until Saturday was because ice on the little bays is just beginning to melt. Indications are that the steamer Kamloops cannot be very far from Isle Royale. Just a little side note here, Amygdaloid Island and 12 o'clock point are actually not related. That was an error in factual information.
Yeah.
Amygdaloid Island is part of Isle Royale, but that is not where 12 o'clock point is. So that was misinformation. Later, they corrected the location of where they found this stuff. 12 o'clock point is accurate. It's just not on that particular island.
Yes, good point on the clarification of the actual spot. So where is this actually? Well, although several of the newspapers at the time reported the location, they were discovered as wrong. They were actually found at a place called 12 o'clock point near Todd Harbor on Isle Royale. And Todd Harbor is nearly in the middle of the northwestern shore of Isle Royale. So it's directly across from the mouth of Thunder Bay where Port Arthur and Fort William would have been. And the entrance to the bay and relative safety being only 15 miles to the northwest. So in ideal conditions, the Kamloops could have made it there in about 90 minutes or less.
Well, one of the bodies had no identification, but the other one had a letter addressed to him in care of the Sioux Canal Post Office. His name was J. Journeau.
Right.
There was also a check for $60 made out to him by Canada Steamship Lines. Journeau had been a watchman on the Kamloops, so that made that pretty easy to identify him.
Right.
His body was returned to his home of Lillet, which is L-Islet. I'm not sure how to say it in French.
I thought you took French classes.
L''Islet, Lillet, for burial. That town is a little bit northeast of Quebec on the St. Lawrence River.
Mm-hmm.
The unidentified sailor was buried at Port Arthur. CSL took great pains to give him a dignified burial. He was actually laid to rest by 4 Canada Steamship Lines captains. So they can't be sure who that person was. He could have been the captain, for all they know. They don't know who he was. So now we have definite debris from the Kamloops. There can be no doubt it sank, but where? An aerial search ensued in the area where the debris and bodies were found, but again, to no avail. Fallout from the loss of the Kamloops led to legislation insisting wireless be installed on all vessels, and U.S. President Calvin Coolidge even sent a representative to the area to investigate the idea that large fleet operators were manipulating the opening and closing of the shipping seasons for financial benefit. Go figure. That representative, D.P. Quinlan, insisted that the shipping season should be regulated, and if it had been, the Kamloops might not have been lost. So once again, America stepping in, finger wagging after the disaster.
Well, you know, that happens. A lot of times people don't act or don't get spurred to unless there's a tragedy involved. And when we covered the ghosts of Flight 401, that was episode 160. I believe that crash also enacted some legislation. And I think it had something to do with the safety in the cockpit, jump seats or something, or limited number of people.
But I remember what you're talking about.
So same thing happening here.
Well, many writers and captains speculated where the Kamloops might actually be, but no one could find it. And most of them speculated that it must have gone down somewhere near Isle Royale where the bodies and debris were found, but they just couldn't figure out where it was. Well, on June 4th, 6 more bodies were found in nearly the same place. They were difficult to identify, but searchers felt that one was a woman. Now, since there were only 2 women aboard, they thought it might be Chief Student Eddie Grafton, but dental records show that Grafton had false teeth, and this person did not. Therefore, it had to be Alice Bettridge, the 22-year-old second stew we mentioned earlier. Now, they all had life belts on, and Bettridge was fully dressed with a sweater and a coat as well. It was thought that these bodies had all been folks who made it into a lifeboat and made it to shore on Isle Royale. Now, 2 of the other 3 male bodies could not be identified, and again were buried in Port Arthur, along with the 3rd body, identified as deckhand G. Gauthier, who they couldn't find a home address for, even though they knew he was from Quebec. Now, a 9th body was found not too much later, but it was found inland on Isle Royale, which led many to believe that the island itself, which will remind you is 200 square miles, 45 miles long and 9 wide, needed to be searched. The thought being that survivors obviously made it there. What if there are more? What if they're still alive? That's unlikely, but we need to find out. And Captain Brian's brother, who was also a captain, organized a private search of Isle Royale. They found no more bodies, but they did find what looked like shelters that could have been built by survivors who had made it to shore. Here's a segment from an article we found titled An Expedition to Search for Kamloops Bodies. Brother of Lost Lake Captain in charge of the party. This is dated June 23rd, 1928, and appeared in the Toronto Star. Captain Brian, following his arrival yesterday, declined to say much concerning the plans for his second attempt. He explained, however, that he had procured James Higgins of the Forestry Department to take charge of actual operations in the woods, and that he had arranged supplies for a party of 7 men for 6 days. Asked to explain his belief that there were bodies to be found in the woods, proving that some of the crew of the Kamloops reached shore alive, Captain Bryan said, and again, I'm reminding you, this is the Captain Bryan of the Kamloops. This is his brother, who was also a captain. Captain Bryan said he needed nothing more than the recent official statement from the Canada Steamship Lines, wherein it was admitted that the body of mate Henry Genest had been located 100 yards from shore under conditions which indicated that he had reached there alive. They wanted to figure out what was going on there. Here, I'm going to skip down to a next section here, subheading what appeared to be a shelter. There were candies spread as if they had been carried up from the shore, where they had drifted in parcels from the wrecked steamer. It was the apparent intention of Genest, or Genest, I'm not sure how to say that. They said to use these candies for food. Boyd says there were indications of a considerable number of such pieces of wreckage having been carried back from the shore. Quote, do you think anyone other than Genest reached the shore alive? Boyd was asked by the Star. Quote, I am of the opinion that the crew of one lifeboat reached shore, end quote, he answered. He then went on to explain that according to Marine rules, certain members of the crew would take to the lifeboat with the first mate, others going with the captain. A lifeboat was found ashore among other pieces of wreckage. To me, this indicates that the boat and members of the crew who would go with the mate reached shore, he added. So this is an interesting thing. And again, coming back to something that we alluded to earlier, every time you hear the word candies, it's Lifesavers. So just keep that in mind. It's Lifesavers candy.
Yeah.
If you don't remember it, they're still for sale everywhere, but they've been around a long time. Back then, they had flavors like Peppo-Mint, P-E-P-O-M-I-N-T.
Yeah, there's some little mini story about the naming of that. Instead of peppermint, it would be Peppo-Mint. It's just immaterial. But and I think they do actually spark if you bite down on them and look at yourself in the mirror in the dark while doing it.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
They do. Yes, there is some
totally
kind of.
forgot about that.
It does remind me a little bit of when we covered Third Man and other mountain climbing stories. Sir Edmund Hillary having Kendall mint cake as a sugar. Well, basically it's just a cake of sugar with mint, and but it kept them fueled. And I remember as Sir Edmund Hillary said, I think something else too is that they had bags of sugar and were soaking it in lemonade and just wolfing it down just for the calories and energy. So not exactly great. If you've ever been in a situation where all you had was candy from the vending machine to replace a dinner and it kind of made you sick.
Yeah.
This is all just awful. Not to make light of this, but just what they had to go through and like, that's all you got. It's tremendously cold. Just awful. Just an awful way to go. But at least they had that and I guess fresh breath.
Well, a lot of people were convinced there was some kind of cover-up happening with regard to whether or not there had been survivors of the Kamloops disaster. Listen to this excerpt from the Isle Royale study. Brock Batten, who served as company spokesman and director of the search and recovery operations undertaken by Canada Steamship Lines, issued a statement to the newspapers detailing the efforts that had been made to learn the fate of the missing crew. The account of Batten's comments to the press was carried in the Port Arthur News Chronicle, June 21st, 1928. And this from that article. Mr. Batten particularly explained why the officials of his company feel certain all members of the Kamloops crew met their death when the steamer went to its doom, and why they do not credit suggestions that they reached shore alive to perish afterwards of hunger and exhaustion. Asked particularly with regard to Henry Genest, it is possible Genest did reach shore alive, said Mr. Batten. The evidence seems to indicate that he was tossed up on the bank and succeeded in walking or crawling a short distance back. I do not believe he was, however, the occupant of a lifeboat. He was more likely washed over from the ship. This is the opinion of our captains, who have had the experience to know what might be happening at such a time. We all believe the most plausible explanation with regard to the others whose bodies have been found is that they were working at the lifeboat, which had been found among the wreckage when they were engulfed. We do not believe they ever entered the lifeboat. If they did, the chances were all against them getting ashore because of the backwash of the waves and the nature of the shoreline. One man in a safety suit might be thrown up where he could get a footing if he were carried by a particularly high wave, but those in a boat could not be so fortunate. Genest apparently was the only one on the Kamloops who had donned a safety suit. If any of the others had done so, their bodies would most likely have been found, as they would thereby at least have been kept floating. The safety suit would keep a man afloat, but would not save him from exhaustion or exposure to the cold. It was 30 below zero at that time and snowing. Asked with regard to reports that shelters had been found at Isle Royale, which might have been used by members of the missing crew, Mr. Batten pointed out that Isle Royale for many years had been a camping and tourist resort and the working ground of fishermen, and the finding of a rude shelter had no significance. It might have been built by anyone at any time. Skipping down to a later part, they reported to us yesterday that they had carefully examined 15 miles of shoreline, and on a front of 4 miles, 2 miles either side of the wreck, had worked inland for about 2 miles at distances apart of only 10 feet and could find neither bodies nor evidence that anyone from the Kamloops had been ashore to live. They are of the opinion there is no reason to continue the search. Friends of the missing ones and the public may rest assured that every effort is being made, and it has been made, to continue fullest information regarding the crew of the missing steamer and to hide nothing. So that's a message that they said. Then the next day, the same paper ran an editorial comment on Batten's statement that gives some insight into the public sentiment. This is June 22nd, 1928, in the Port Arthur News Chronicle. Even though the statement comes at what we consider a rather late date, it will nevertheless be welcomed by the public. The attitude taken by the officials of the Canada Steamship Company toward the public was not by any means satisfactory. The loss of the ship involved much more than the interests of the company. The public was entitled to a frank statement of what the company was doing, the extent of the search that was taking place at the time it was being made. But this knowledge was not given them. The whole proceeding was surrounded with mystery. The same unsatisfactory procedure was followed when the U.S. cutter Crawford brought the dead bodies of 2 of the ill-fated crew of the Kamloops to Port Arthur. Orders were issued to dock attendants to close the docks and not permit any person to approach. The undertakers were given orders to give out no information. The newspapers were compelled to get information from whatever source they could in regard to the finding of the bodies. When other bodies were brought to port, every possible precaution was taken to prevent information getting to the public. This attitude of the company could not but arouse suspicion in the public mind that there was something to hide. However unfounded the suspicion might be, it continued, and Mr. Batten can count himself extremely fortunate if it is dissipated by the statement he just made of the measures taken by the company to deal with the situation when it first arose and subsequently when the remains of the unfortunates were found. And then the study writers added to the end of that article, Batten's statement did not dissipate the public feelings, at least with some of the people directly involved. Captain Bryan, who had returned to his hometown of Kingston, returned to Port Arthur a few days later to mount another search of the island for his missing brother and the other crewmen.
Hi, this is Amy Poehler, along with Emily Spivey and Liz Kukowski.
Hello.
Now, Emily Spivey is Scott Philbrook's wife, and she, along with Liz, make up a new podcast called Women Talking About Murder. It is a parody podcast from Paper Kite Podcasts. We have made such podcasts as Say More with Dr. Sheila and the Chris Chapman Do-Over. And much like Astonishing Legends, Women Talking About Murder talk about important, interesting, fake cases that keep you up at night. And you might even hear your favorite voice, Scott Philbrook, making an appearance. So keep listening and downloading Astonishing Legends and check out Women Talking About Murder on Odyssey or wherever you get your podcasts.
Wow, it's like you're really good at that. That was awesome.
Wow, you're good at that.
Women Talking About Murder is about 2 women helping women not to get murdered. This is Jo Beth. I like to stay close to home due to the fact, I've been stalked. I've almost been murdered many, many times.
This is Donna. I love it all. I'm a yes person. I love a road trip. And I love a city at night. So I just walk around and, say hi to whoever I pass. I'll go to a temple. I'll go to a church. I'll go to a seance. I'll go to someone's basement when he says, come on over.
I'm worried sick about Donna, but that's what makes it work between us. I am sort of her protector. I like to feel that I am a mama bear to all women who are about to be murdered. Her body was found at the bottom of the Red Rocks on day 3 of a women's yoga retreat. If I could have only one bumper sticker, that bumper sticker would say, "It's always the husband."
So, Jo Beth, today's murder happened on a cruise ship?
Of course it did.
I love cruises.
Of course you do. His body was found in Doug's basement, bludgeoned to death by a pet rock.
Oh, do we know the pet rock's name? Because that might be a clue.
Should we do my wrap up?
Yes.
This has been Jo Beth.
And Donna.
And as always, don't go in basements. Don't cross state lines alone. Don't ever load something into the back seat of your car unless you're facing outward. Don't let the gas guy in your house ever. Don't go jogging. Don't go walking. Don't have affairs. Don't go on a cruise. Don't do sports. And finally, do not have fun. Love you all. Stay indoors, my babies.
Available on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, I'm Hannah, and you're listening to Astonishing Legends with Scott Philbrook and Forrest. It's all connected, Burgess. Now, back to the show.
So it seems that the public, at least, thought that maybe the company was up to something fishy with regard to the search. It reminds me a little bit of Amelia Earhart and the whole idea that had she been held captive in Saipan, the U.S. government had allowed America's aviatrix, at the time the word, to be held captive and possibly tortured and abused or maybe even assassinated. No matter what, if you found her, that's not something you're later going to say, oh, yep, we let her rot away in a prison in Saipan.
Right.
It's the same kind of thing here. I think with this company, what the public was probably thinking, and we don't know, we weren't there, but whatever the public was thinking was like, they didn't do enough to search for these people and they died a horrible death as a result. That seems to be the implication that the public is making, I think.
Right.
And also the fact that the first mate, Henri Geneste, had been found 100 yards from shore and had gotten there alive was enough for Captain Brian's brother to keep searching the island, but they couldn't find anything else.
Well, the next turn in this story is heartbreaking and a little chilling and just an interesting aspect about what the realities are of shipwrecks and survivors and, frankly, a third man, or in this case, a third woman scenario. Now, we don't know that part of it, but this is what we're talking about when the chips are down. Your back is against the wall. And but at least a message gets out, and that message happens to be in a bottle that was found later. And so now we're going to take a look at an article that appears in the Sioux Today news site for the newspaper here, Sioux Today, SOO today.com. Titled, A Shipwreck, a Young Woman, and a Message in a Bottle. This week, Remember This, it's their feature segment here, looks back on the wreck of the freighter Camloops. This is from May 26, 2019, and they cite the facts of this story from the Sault Ste. Marie Public Library. And it starts off talking about the main points of the story which we just covered here. But in December of 1928, a trapper working north of Sault Ste. Marie finds a message in a bottle at the mouth of the Agawa River. The message was written by a young woman who was a stewardess from the crew of the SS Kamloops, and apparently the last surviving member. Now remember, again, the Camloops had gone down a year earlier in 1927, December. So this is about a year later after the ship is lost. The Sioux Star newspaper at the time had described a few boats going down in what they called a raging blizzard with frosting fog. So that's fog just turning to frost. It's so cold. And again, it also says the Kadak traveling in the same direction as Camloops. They spotted that large weather mass dead ahead of them. They turned. They tried to notify the Camloops, but they did not respond. As the Sioux Star reported, it probably, quote, foundered on the rocks at some isolated point. And they're talking about the Camloops, like what happened to it. Well, they thought it had grounded itself, not totally sunk. Again, there's no wireless communications. The rescue efforts were hampered because of such harsh weather conditions. And then also, you got to figure the wintry weather limits the survivability for anybody who survived the sinking. So again, with more severe winter settling in, the search was suspended. It's feared now all 22 people had gone down with the ship. And as we said, the likely place everybody thought was Isle Royale, which was described by the Globe newspaper then as, quote, a forbidding jungle in the winter. So even if they made it, it would have been tough going for any survivors.
And as we mentioned earlier, some crew members' bodies had been found by this point, so there was not a lot of hope there was going to be survivors anywhere.
Right, right. Eventually, the weather is going to warm up, and it did in May of 1928, and this allows the search effort to resume. But of course, instead of a rescue operation for survivors, the search now turns to focusing on finding the ship and recovering any bodies that are near it. The search even included planes from the Ontario government, which flew out over Sault Ste. Marie to Sioux Lookout on Lake Superior. So they're involving planes. I know it's not a big deal now, but it was back in 1928.
Yes.
Also in 1928, Louis Coutu, a fur trapper from Sault Ste. Marie, finds a pickle jar or a whiskey bottle with some paper inside while he is working on the Agawa River over 150 miles from where the Camloops was thought to have gone down. Now, here's an interesting side note about Louis Coutu, and it's Louis, as we might say down here in the States, Louis, last name spelled Coutu. I think the family pronounced it Coutu. So as a side note for vintage hockey fans, Louis Coutu was the brother of Billy Coutu, a Canadian professional hockey player nicknamed Wild Beaver.
Oh,
leaving that one alone. Billy Coutu has the distinction of being the only player ever to be banned from the National Hockey League for life for attacking a referee in 1927.
Oh, wow, that's a good fact.
But no, that's just a weird, it's just a weird connection that this guy is the brother of somebody that was well known back then. It would be an odd thing. Wayne Gretzky's brother finding it, who's a fur trapper and finds a message in a bottle. That kind of thing.
Right.
Well, here's a little story on that. Louis Coutu took the message in the bottle back to Sault Ste. Marie, where its discovery then became big news, as you can imagine. The author of the note, Alice Bettridge, apparently requested that whoever found it take it to the Sault Star newspaper. And at first, that's what Louis Coutu was going to do. But then Coutu changed his mind and decided he wanted something for it. In a Sault Star newspaper article, he was quoted as saying, quote, he had to pay for all he got in the Sioux, and if the people of the Sioux want to know what is in the note, they can pay for it. They've never done anything for me, and he was going to do the same. So he's like, hey, what have you ever done for me lately? It's going to cost you if you want to read the note. He realized he had something valuable. Well, sounds kind of jerky, but there's a little bit more to that. Coutu is now going to offer the note to the highest bidder in what he called a, quote, simple money proposition. Just, you're going to pay me, and then you'll get to see it, and the highest bidder will get to see it. Well, this money grab had many speculating about the authenticity of the find and whether Coutu faked it, with some Sioux-tites having the sentiment that, quote, any man with a heart would not refuse to give the message of a dying man to the world if he asked that it be published, end quote. But in an interview with the Star newspaper, Coutu stated that he also intended to contact the family of the note's author before he made the note public, which is also why there was a delay in notifying the public about it. And Coutu did pass along some content from the note, telling the Star newspaper that the writer did specify that the ship indeed had sunk near Isle Royale as predicted. The letter writer also stated that they were the last surviving member of the ship and didn't expect to last much longer. The note was signed Al, who was dead. At first, people assumed that this Al was a male crew member of the Camloops, but Al was actually a young woman in her early 20s named Alice Bettridge, as we said, from Southampton, Ontario, who was working as an assistant stewardess aboard the Camloops. Although the note was assumed to be a hoax by Louis Coutu, Alice's parents confirmed that the handwriting was hers. And she had described the wrecking of the ship and how she made it to shore by herself, saying, quote, I am the last one left alive, freezing and starving to death on Isle Royale. I just want Mom and Dad to know my fate, end quote. A few months before Coutu had discovered her message, her remains had been recovered in June of 1928. And she was identified by papers found on her body and by her teeth, as the only other woman aboard the ship had false teeth. And once again, those notes are taken directly from a SiouxToday.com article, which is an interesting little side note about this shipwreck and tragic note and just, heart-wrenching. And imagine being the only survivor and knowing, like, you're not going to make it. But you have the chance to send that last final note, which also gives us an insight as to what really happened with the Camloops and where did she really go down. So people were right about that. All right. Well, remember when we mentioned Captain Ken Merriman and his company SuperiorTrips.com? Well, on August 21st, 1977, a sport diver named Ken Engelbrecht chartered Captain Merriman's boat, Hey Boy, to take him out looking for the Camloops. Engelbrecht and his diving partner, Randy Salter, were working off a fathometer tracing made by Captain Roy Oberg of a boat called the Voyager 2.
Okay, so I'm going to read some excerpts from this article. This is from the Minneapolis Star, Thursday, October 13th, 1977. The article headline was Kamloops' Icy Grave Discovered, but its sinking remains a mystery. This is by Blair Charnley. So I'm going to read some excerpts from here. When a group of Twin Cities divers found the wreckage of Kamloops in August, it remained ghostly. Submerged in 200 or more feet of icy Lake Superior water, the freighter is still a mystery. The thrilled divers say their find, termed historic by experts, has yet to conclusively reveal the secret of the ship's sinking, and the truth may never be revealed. The divers aren't alone in being excited about their discovery. Julius F. Wolfe Jr., a professor at the University of Minnesota Duluth who has done a great deal of research on Great Lakes shipwrecks, says, quote, "The Kamloops find must be cited among the most significant in 20th century Lake Superior shipping history," end quote. Wolfe ranks the Kamloops with a handful of famous Flying Dutchmen, mysteriously missing ships of Lake Superior. On August 21st, 1977, Ken Merriman's somewhat elderly cruiser Hayboy, with 4 Twin Cities divers aboard, is nosing around 12 o'clock point on Isle Royale for the second day. The divers were directed to the area by Roy Oberg, a lake captain from Grand Portage, who some time back had made an instrument sighting of an object that could have been the Kamloops. It's their second day of searching, first with instruments and then in a series of dives, 2 men on the cruiser, 2 underwater. On one dive, they find a brass barrel and a ladder. On the next, a few metal pipes. Then they find, quote, enough pipe to fill a semi-truck, end quote, and they believe the pipe is part of the Kamloops cargo. They feel they're getting close, but the weekend is almost over. 2 of them go down for the final dive of the day. On the surface, the men on the Hayboy are worried. The divers have stayed in the water longer than planned, and once 2 gigantic air bubbles exploded on the surface, a possible sign of trouble. About 195 feet down, in the words of Ken Engelbrecht, 26, from Crystal, quote, I saw this really big shadow, the Kamloops and this other shadow coming out of it, which was the flagpole. I got a really big rush and I started trucking over there, end quote. His partner for the dive, Randy Salter, 22, from Mounds View, picked up the story. Quote, this guy just about tore my arm off, hanging onto that flagpole and shaking my hand. He had the biggest smile I've ever seen, end quote. That's probably when they created the gigantic bubbles. They don't remember for sure. Diving at that depth is tricky and dangerous. A diver with ordinary equipment can't stay at the bottom for more than a few minutes, and he has to spend about an hour coming slowly to the surface so that his body can compensate for the changing water pressure. Diving at such depths can result in nitrogen narcosis, which occurs when underwater pressure causes nitrogen to get into the diver's blood and make him drunk, in quotes. The diver must surface gradually to lower the nitrogen level, or he may suffer the painful and possibly fatal bends, or something the divers call getting bent. The divers first returned to the Kamloops on Labor Day weekend, September 5th and 6th. Merriman, 28, Minneapolis, said that on the basis of the first dive, we weren't sure at first we had found the Kamloops. The real proof, he said, came after the second dive, when pictures on close inspection showed the ship's name peeking out through the years of accumulated rust and underwater debris on the freighter's stern. When you're down there, your mind's all screwed up, he said, because of the narcosis. As a result, the divers only remember about 50% of the details of their dives, and safety precautions have to be doubled and tripled. Another effect of the depth is that they can only stay at the bottom a short time. 12 minutes is their longest time on the wreck. Skipping ahead a little bit. Each diver carries spare equipment, 2 lamps, for example, in case a bulb burns out, and Merriman presets the exposure on his underwater camera. You don't trust yourself to do it right down there, he says. The wreck lies on its side on a steep slope. The stern is toward shore, about 195 feet below the surface at its shallowest point. One of the first things the divers check is the condition of the rudder and propeller. They seem to be intact. So side note there, that would indicate that it probably capsized and not that they lost the rudder and lost control. The divers go to the back deck and examine a large wooden wheel. It's apparently an auxiliary steering wheel for emergencies because the main steering equipment would be in the pilot house near the bow of the ship. They gradually explore, becoming more and more intoxicated by the narcosis and the excitement of discovery. They note that the glass in a skylight over the engine room is intact, snap some more pictures, and move forward along the 250-foot ship. Forward means down because the bow is much deeper than the stern. They see other artifacts, the inside of a cabin, a string of new shoes to be sold in some Canadian store, a drum with a steel cable neatly rolled on it, a running light that looks in good condition. They can't make it to the pilot house at the front. It's too deep. But they get about 2/3 of the way forward and they can see the pilot house with its top shorn off. Its roof was found in the 1920s along with other debris. It's a real temptation to swim in and stand at the wheel, but they resist the impulse because of the danger. I'm going to skip down to the end of the article now to a quote from Captain Merriman, the captain of the Hayboy, whose boat they were diving off of. Merriman, an electrical engineer, helps support his shipwreck hunting hobby by running charters for other divers with the Hayboy. When I have a charter, I go to known wrecks, he says. Otherwise, I look for new ones. Salter adds, people were laughing behind our backs because we spent so much time searching, but not anymore. Merriman is relieved that the wreck was found late in the season. That'll give all the other interested divers time to properly prepare for next summer. He added, I'd hate like hell to find a shipwreck and lose a friend.
All right, well, it's safe to say that even though Engelbrecht and Salter were the first to dive on the SS Kamloops wreckage, it was actually Captain Roy Oberg of the Voyager 2 to be the man who found it, and the year he discovered it, well, we can't actually say for sure what year that is. Engelbrecht says it was a few years before he dove on it in 1977, so I don't know, maybe 1974 or 1975, who knows? But yes, Captain Oberg is the man on that one. During our research for this, we actually found an audio interview with Captain Oberg that is over an hour long and is available for anyone to listen to at the Minnesota Digital Library. It's pretty cool that they have this. Now, there's no mention of the Camloops on this, but not only is it up there, but it was recorded on board the Voyager 2 while it was underway on Lake Superior to several destinations, one of them being Isle Royale. And on top of that, it was recorded on July 30th, 1977, just 22 days before Engelbrecht and Salter would dive on the fathometer target he'd identified years earlier, and confirm indeed it was the SS Kamloops.
Well, now it's time to talk about old Whitey. And before we go any further, we want to make it clear that neither one of us are trained in diving, but we do know this. Diving to 190 feet where the Kamloops is takes advanced training. A junior diver may be trained to descend to a maximum depth of 12 meters or 40 feet. Open water certification gets you to 18 meters or 59 feet. Advanced open water may get you to 30 meters or 100 feet. PADI, P-A-D-I, the Professional Association of Diving Instructors, offers a deep diving course that even takes you to 40 meters or 130 feet. Now, the Camloops is at 190 feet at the stern and I think 270 feet at the bow on a steep slope. At these depths, you need extreme training, and as you heard from the article we shared earlier, there are a lot of other considerations, including nitrogen narcosis, or rapture of the deep. This actually becomes a concern at any depth greater than 30 meters or 98 feet.
Isn't that also called blue cheer?
Yes, it is, exactly, because it can cause you to laugh.
Yeah.
Signs and symptoms of narcosis at various depths are as follows. This is from Wikipedia. The most dangerous aspects of narcosis are the impairment of judgment, multitasking and coordination, and the loss of decision-making ability and focus. Other effects include vertigo and visual or auditory disturbances. The syndrome may cause exhilaration, giddiness, extreme anxiety, depression, or paranoia, depending on the individual diver and the diver's medical or personal history. When more serious, the diver may feel overconfident, disregarding normal safe diving practices. Slowed mental activity, as indicated by increased reaction time and increased errors in cognitive function, are effects which increase the risk of a diver mismanaging an incident. Narcosis reduces both the perception of cold discomfort and shivering, and thereby affects the production of body heat and consequently allows a faster drop in the core temperature in cold water with reduced awareness of the developing problem. The relation of depth to narcosis is sometimes informally known as Martini's Law. The idea that narcosis results in the feeling of one martini for every 10 meters, or 33 feet, below 20 meters, 66 feet of depth. This is a rough guide to give new divers a comparison with a situation they may be more familiar with.
Well, you want to know what Forrest's Martini Law is?
What is it?
1 is not enough and 3 is too many. And that law goes out the window after the second martini. But no, I like that they have that because most folks can relate to that. And it's like it gives you a good guide. It depends a lot on the person, but these are general guidelines. So this is all to say, though, that what are people seeing when they claim to have seen old Whitey?
Yeah.
There are a few theories, and it could be the bends, but is everybody getting the bends? Well, to go deeper than 190 feet, divers mix another gas into their oxygen and nitrogen. Generally, it's helium, although according to restrictedwaters.com, helium can get toxic at certain depths too. And then at that point, they resort to argon, the gas.
See, I didn't know you could breathe argon. That's pretty wild.
Well, I think in small in small amounts. There's a bunch of other gases other than just oxygen and nitrogen made up in our atmosphere, but I believe helium is one. And but too much of anything is not great. Some people will use what are called rebreathers, which processes your carbon dioxide so you can stay down longer, although that kind of diving is also very dangerous. Point being, all along here, everything about this story, everything about diving, the Great Lakes, everything about this connected is very dangerous.
That said, a lot of the diving schools will tell you, even though it's technical and complicated, it can be done with the proper training, and plenty of recreational divers are doing it all the time.
Yeah.
Now, as you can see, you have to know what you're doing, and there's a fair chance you may experience some extremely strange things at those greater depths, as Forrest was just saying. Well, after the Camloops was discovered, of course, the divers that could manage it wanted to dive on it. There's a link in our show notes on the webpage for this episode at astonishinglegends.com to a few videos of the wreckage that have been posted online, including one from 2019 posted by Brett Halderson, Halderson. Some of the most stunning footage is from 2021 and was filmed by Becky Kagan Schott, Schott, and is posted in astonishing 4K. It's really cool to see. You can see all the things you might expect, including the new shoes that were aboard, the fencing that iced over and might have capsized the ship, and what is commonly referred to as the candies. As we said, the candies were lifesavers, and there were a lot of them aboard. There were crates and crates of them, and they can be seen strewn through the wreckage at the bottom of Lake Superior. While the boxes have dissolved away, they are still bundled together almost as if in invisible containers. Now, if you'll consult your notes for this episode, you'll remember how we explained that lake freighters had their engine rooms at the stern where the firemen were housed as well to keep the fires going for power. And the Camloops was on its side with the stern at 190 feet of depth and the bow further down a slope at 270 feet, past the point that most divers can get to. However, the stern is right at that level that is on the edge of the depth a normal advanced diver can reach without significant additional training, as we understand it anyway. Angry divers, send your emails to Forrest. But the point here is that the stern is at a depth that's accessible with a lesser degree of training than the depth of the bow. Now, something unexpected happened when people began diving on the Camloops. Many divers reported seeing a ghostly figure aboard, a character they called Grandpa or Old Whitey. Originally wearing overalls, this figure was seen haunting the engine room. Stories began to circulate in the diving world that this ghost was trapped in the wreckage, but more than that, it appeared to follow you around when you were down there. One legend stated it would move from its resting place to join and pursue divers, only to return to its post when it was time for them to surface. Now, as we've indicated, anyone could be forgiven for hallucinating at that depth, but would everyone be seeing the same thing? Could there be a ghost aboard the Camloops, and if so, who was it? Now, a lot of times when we share a story like this, we have to just leave it at, no, we'll never know, but it's fun to think about. What is the phenomenon that's occurring in the wreck of the Camloops, and why is everyone seeing the same thing? But this time it's different. Old Whitey has been captured on film, and this isn't a blurry photo. This is a clear image of a deceased individual floating in the engine room of the Camloops. It's on video, actually. And as far as we can tell, it's the only time that an image of Old Whitey has been posted on the internet. Other divers may have more, but it's easy to imagine they might not have posted it out of respect, because Old Whitey is not a hallucination. He's quite real. He's not a ghost at all, but a victim of the accident whose body has undergone saponification. He is turned to soap. I mean, it's not technically soap, but that's what people say.
It's soap-like, I would say. Here's the other thing about it. There are two, what I call versions of Old Whitey. One that people see. Obviously, they see him because he's down there. He's on videotape in stunning 4K. It's a body. It's
well, now the 4K video, I want to point this out, does not contain the shot of him.
Sorry, that's
There's
right.
Another
Yes,
video that
you're
does.
right.
Yes,
but watch the 4K because it's just amazingly clear what is down there, and the water is also very clear that you can make out. It's just very clear if you want to get a sense of what's down there, and it is spooky, creepy, and fascinating all at once. But Old Whitey is a body. It is the remains of one of the crew members aboard the ship who was trapped down there. A lot of people say as you said, the staircase, trapped under the staircase in the engine room, pinned down, which is also a fascinating aspect because if he is, then how is he floating about? No one has forcibly removed his body, but he seems to float about. Many, of course, think, trying to rationalize this, it's just the current. So as you swim through the area with gear, you're creating a hydrodynamic effect where you're pulling waters with you, and then Whitey just follows you around, as anything that was kind of half floating would be. The other Whitey, though, that people have claimed, I want to make this distinction, is that it's not the body, they see a ghost.
And that's the one where there's a difference between Old Whitey and then a character they call Grandpa.
Yeah,
which, like, some people are saying, oh, it's the same guy. And it's like, no, that's two different things. Old Whitey is the saponified, I don't know if that's a word. The saponified body. And then Grandpa is more of a spectral being.
Yes, because wearing the overalls that are still attached.
Well, then other people have said, though, that the overalls were on Whitey.
Were on Whitey.
So
I know it's convoluted, but I think generally when you hear the reports, there are two different things that people sometimes would lump together, but really I think it's two separate entities, two separate bodies, two separate things.
Right.
Now, the saponification, there's other famous cases, of course. I think you had a note in here of the soap lady of Philadelphia. You'll have to tell me more about that and us. And then I covered the Lady of the Lake with the Loremen. That would be their season 3, episode 75, entitled The Soap Woman with Forrest Burgess. But we had a terrific amount of fun. I found that story in a Myths and Legends of Washington State, available at Costco. When I was on Christmas vacation up there, and said, well, here you go. Here's at least one episode's worth of stories for our show. And that happened to be one of the more fascinating cases there. But so the environmental conditions play a big factor in this, and that the lake is it's not a great lake, but it's a very deep lake, Lake Crescent, I believe, and very cold. And the local indigenous population, the native peoples, believe that there's some bad mojo going on with that lake. It's been claimed for generations, maybe hundreds of years, that people don't bob up. If you drown in the lake, you're gone. The lake takes you. It does not give up its dead. That somehow, due to the conditions of the lake, a lot of people would believe it's something supernatural, that people just sink and you go to the bottom and that's it. And what happened with the Lady of the Lake, after she saponified, which is a chemical process, she popped up to the surface and was recovered and then later identified. And in that case, a victim of, they think, domestic violence. But the other thing I was going to say that's also kind of creepy with that lake, there is a gentleman, I can't remember because that was such a long time ago when we covered that, is that he had some kind of sonic device. I think he was a local professor or a doctorate of some kind, and was out experimenting on the lake and had created the sonic device that would search for objects at certain depths. And he took that into Crescent Lake, and I believe that what he could figure out was that there was a ledge, an underwater, not so much a cave, but kind of an overhang or ledge, very deep, and that due to the currents of the lake or the way that the water moves, that there may be dozens of bodies that are trapped under that ledge that have not surfaced. They're just kind of bobbing around down below, which is frightening because, I mean, again, they could be hundreds, 1,000, a couple thousand years old, perhaps, as long as that lake's been there and people have been there. And anyway, so it's a very creepy, spooky lake, but it shares with the Great Lakes that it is deep, it is very cold. So the conditions are just right for saponification. Not to everybody, but certainly with that lady.
Well, yeah, it depends a little bit on body fat and what your tissue makeup is. It's basically what's happening is the body is turning into a substance called adipocere, ADIPOCERE, which is commonly referred to as corpse wax or grave wax. And it's created by the, quote, anaerobic bacterial hydrolysis of fat in tissue, such as body fat in corpses, according to Wikipedia. There's more to it than that, but if you really want to learn about it, visit the outstanding YouTube channel Ask a Mortician, which we're sure many of you are already familiar with. She's got 4 million subscribers. And look for a video from Caitlin, the host of that channel, entitled, quote, The Lake That Never Gives Up Her Dead, which, by the way, is a play on the lyrics to Gordon Lightfoot's Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. We have a link to that video in our show notes, of course. Again, if you go to astonishinglegends.com and find the webpage for this episode. So the bottom line here is that old Whitey, at least a version of him, is very real.
Yeah.
And to the credit of all the divers that have been to the Kamloops, he has been left alone in his watery grave. And in fact, his image has only been shared online in one place that we could find. That was a YouTube video posted by user Doug Bell. We'll have a link to that too. But viewer discretion is advised. Well, so the big question is, what happened to the Kamloops? For sure, there's a lot of speculation, but it's fair to say that thanks to Alice Bettridge's message in a bottle, we might know what happened, at least from one crew member's perspective. Oh wait, we still haven't shared what the message said.
No, most articles you'll come across, if they mention it, just have the most chilling parts, and you don't hear the other details of what happened. Now, what was fascinating, again, we saw that little interplay about Louis, the fur trapper, not wanting to divulge all of it, but we got a lot of it, enough to kind of figure out what happened. And then, as you point out here, part of the note was destroyed, so you have to infer some of it, but I think it gives you a good view and an accurate one, perhaps, of what actually happened. So,
yes.
So about Alice Bettridge's note, earlier, we mentioned the message in a bottle, or could have been a pickle jar, some kind of glass container. It was left by 22-year-old Alice Bettridge. Now, the first rapper, who was the hockey player's brother, Lewis, he had found it at the mouth of the Gawa River. And some reports say that it's 150 miles from where the Kamloops was found, but in reality, it's closer to 210. And the bottle had to have gone northeast from the north side of Isle Royale out into the lake, and that alone was about 30 miles. And then it would have had to have drifted another 180 miles to where the Agawa River meets Lake Superior, 60 miles north of Sault Ste. Marie, and 1 year after the Kamloops had sank. So I'm fascinated by how things travel.
Yeah,
You see that on the news occasionally, like kids will throw, please call me if you get this, write to me, if it's old, write to me. Right. And a lot of times they're found and they've traveled all over the world.
Yes.
That just fascinates me. But here's quite a ways for this to travel, and just the odds that it was found are staggering here. But as far as we could find, there's not a full publication of the letter, as we were saying, but some of it is here and some of it is out there, and we have a portion of it here we could find. And we'll read this as follows. Now keep in mind that it was damaged, again, and some words were guessed at based on the context of the surrounding language. STR, standing for steamer, Kamloops, went down with all hands near the extreme west point of Isle Royale on December 6th. That part is hard to read. All hands but myself. Finder, please notify Canal Office or Sioux Daily Star so my people will know my fate. Tell them it was just me who is not dead. Please do not disregard this note. Please, SOS, SOS. Cold, cold. Bitter, wondrous cold. Very urgent. Please notify Sioux Star or Canada Canal. It's minus 48 degrees Fahrenheit here now. Our bare wire cargo became loaded with ice and we capsized in 18 fathoms of water. Wreck, ... ellipses here. Part of that's missing. So what follows after the word wreck is gone. But the note was signed Al, and because of that, as we said, when it was found by Kutu and others, it was assumed it was a male crew member. But Alice Bettridge's parents saw it, and yes, they did confirm it was her handwriting, just as they confirmed her family nickname was Al for Alice. Now, in hindsight, it seems possible that in addition to Alice, that first mate, Henry Genest, may have survived as well, and possibly a few others. But it's also conceivable that some of the survivors, like Alice, thought that they were the only ones who had made it out. Her indication of the Kamloops being capsized tracks with the way the vessel is now currently resting on its side on the bottom, and the dispersion of what's left of the cargo. Some people have thrown the word ghost ship around when it comes to the SS Kamloops. But the Kamloops was not a ghost ship in the traditional sense because, as far as we know, it was never seen sailing around Lake Superior after it was lost that long ago night in 1927. The SS Kamloops is a different kind of ghost ship, one that actually has a permanent ghost aboard in the form of old Whitey, trapped for eternity 200 feet below the surface in the twisted wreckage of an infamous lake freighter, surrounded by crates of lifesavers.
That's going to wrap up episode 283 of Astonishing Legends. We'll be back literally next week with a new episode. Find and subscribe to the other shows from the Astonishing Legends Network, The Midnight Library, Scared All the Time, and Richard Haddam's Paranormal Bookshelf, wherever you get your podcasts. We have links to all of them in our show notes. You can also find us at patreon.com/astonishinglegends.
Astonishing Legends is edited by Sarah Voorhees-Wendell at VW Sound and co-produced by Tess Feifel, who is also head of research and the social media manager. Our technical producer is Ed Vicola, or as we call him, the Mechanic. Special thanks to our announcer, John Boland.
Hi, I'm Jen Cash.
Good evening. My name's Adam.
And my name's Matt.
God, I'm such an idiot. That's Hannah spelled H-A-N-N-A-H.
I listen to Astonishing Legends with my dog Andy.
Love the show, guys.
Our theme, which is available as a ringtone, was composed by Judson Crane at foundermusic.com. All other music and sound design for the show is composed and created by Alan Carestia.
Our logo was created by Tommy Beaver Design, and our animated graphics for social media and YouTube are done by Joshua Sloan at deadstreetproductions.com.
Every episode going back to September of 2020 has a transcription available on its corresponding webpage at our website. Earlier transcriptions can be made available upon request to astonishingcontact@gmail.com.
Astonishing Legends would not be possible without you, our listeners. Visit our store at astonishinglegends.com or interact with us and other listeners on Instagram, Twitter, Discord, Facebook, and YouTube.
You can also visit us at patreon.com/astonishinglegends, where patrons have access to additional bonus content, including the Patreon exclusive show, Astonishing Junk Drawer, which is available every week. The main show is not. No part of this show may be reproduced anywhere without permission. Copyright Astonishing Legends Productions.
Good night.